The mistake that would end 3 military careers and humiliate an entire SEAL team began with a single glance across a parking lot at 0547 hours on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Dalton had no idea that the limping woman in the faded Army uniform, struggling across the asphalt with a cane and a walking boot, was about to become the most expensive assumption of his life. In exactly 47 minutes, he would walk into a conference room expecting a routine training debrief and instead come face to face with a truth so devastating it would make him wish he could rewind time and swallow every careless word. But right now, in this moment, as pre-dawn darkness still clung to the edges of Naval Amphibious Base Little Creek, Virginia, Marcus Dalton was just another arrogant SEAL who thought he knew everything about everyone he saw. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The rhythmic thud of boots against asphalt echoed through the parking lot as Dalton and his 6-man SEAL team pulled their gear bags from the transport van, their bodies still carrying the adrenaline come down from a 72-hour training evolution in the North Carolina swamps. They were exhausted, mud-caked, and running on nothing but black coffee and the particular brand of arrogance that comes from being part of the most elite fighting force on the planet. That's when they saw her, a woman in Army combat uniform, limped across the parking lot toward the medical building, her right leg dragging slightly with each step. Her acu pattern was faded, the fabric worn thin in places that suggested years of use rather than fresh issue. A medical walking boot encased her left foot, and she gripped a simple aluminum cane in her right hand. Her hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, revealing a face lined with exhaustion and something deeper. Something that looked like pain, that had learned to live quietly beneath the surface. She couldn't have been more than 5'6", slight in build, moving with the careful deliberation of someone whose body had been broken and imperfectly reassembled. Petty Officer First Class Derek Chen was the first to notice her. He elbowed Petty Officer Second Class Tyler Brooks, jerking his chin toward the approaching figure. "Check it out. Army plane dress-up on our base." Brooks snorted, adjusting the massive rucksack on his shoulders. "What's she doing here? Little Creek is Navy territory. Army's got their own medical facilities. Probably got injured doing desk work and needs a Navy doc to hold her hand," Senior Chief Petty Officer Andrew Washington added, his voice carrying across the parking lot with the easy confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences for his words. At 38, Washington was the oldest member of the team and carried himself with the swagger of a man who'd been proving his toughness. For 2 decades, the woman glanced in their direction, her dark eyes meeting theirs for just a fraction of a second before returning to the careful navigation of the uneven pavement. She didn't acknowledge them, didn't react to Washington's comment, just kept moving with that painful, measured gait. Lieutenant Junior Grade Kevin Park, the team's newest officer and youngest member at 24, felt something uncomfortable twist in his gut. "Maybe we should." "Should what?" Dalton interrupted, dropping his bag with a heavy thud. "Offer to carry her purse. She's Army, Park, different breed. Probably hurt herself on a morning jog and decided to make a career out of it." He said it loud enough that the woman couldn't possibly miss it. Still, she didn't turn, didn't react, just kept walking. Chief Petty Officer Brandon Cole, the team medic, squinted at her retreating form. Something about the way she moved nagged at him, professional instinct whispering that this wasn't a minor injury being milked for sympathy. That walking boot and cane combination, the way she favored her right side, the carefully controlled breathing he could see even from this distance, that was someone managing significant pain. Not exaggerating minor discomfort, but he stayed quiet. The team was already ragging on Park for being soft. Cole wasn't about to join him in the doghouse. $10 says she's here for a medical discharge. Petty Officer Second Class James Mitchell offered, pulling out his phone to check messages. Got hurt in training, couldn't hack it. Now she's collecting disability. Army Rangers probably rejected her, so she's shopping for sympathy from Navy docs, Chen added with a laugh. I've seen it before. Some people join the military thinking it's like the movies. Then reality hits and suddenly, everyone's got PTSD and a bad back. The woman reached the medical building entrance, some 50 yards away now. She paused at the door, one hand on the handle, and for just a moment, her shoulders seemed to sag under an invisible weight. Then she straightened, pulled the door open, and disappeared inside. Anyway, Dalton said, slinging his bag over his shoulder, we've got debrief in an hour. Let's get cleaned up and grab some real food. I need eggs and about a gallon of orange juice. The team gathered their gear and headed toward the barracks, already forgetting the limping woman in army uniform. She was just another face, another injured soldier. Another person who didn't belong to their world of underwater demolitions, high-altitude jumps, and classified operations that would never appear in any history book. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story, just another woman who couldn't keep up. None of them noticed the small detail that might have changed everything. The worn combat patch on her right shoulder, positioned exactly where soldiers wear the insignia of units they've deployed with in combat. The patch was so faded that the specific unit was barely visible in the dim parking lot light. But if any of them had looked closer, if any of them had cared enough to actually see her rather than simply categorize her, they might have recognized the distinctive design. They might have asked questions. They might have shown respect. Instead, they walked away, laughing about the previous night's training mishaps, planning their breakfast orders, and discussing the upcoming deployment schedule. The injured woman was already forgotten, dismissed as irrelevant to their world, unworthy of their attention or courtesy. It would take exactly 47 minutes for them to realize their mistake. 40-7 minutes before they walked into the base commander's conference room for what they assumed would be a routine training debrief. 47 minutes before they saw her again. 40-7 minutes before, Lieutenant Commander Marcus Dalton and his entire team understood that the limping woman they'd mocked in the parking lot was about to change their lives in ways they couldn't possibly imagine, because while they'd been making assumptions based on her appearance, based on her gender, based on her injuries and her service branch, they'd failed to do the one thing that every special operator is trained to do from day one: gather intelligence before engaging the enemy. And in this case, their enemy wasn't the woman in the parking lot. It was their own arrogance. The sun was beginning to rise over the Virginia coast, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, as beautiful and indifferent as justice itself. In the medical building, the woman they'd dismissed was signing paperwork, preparing for a meeting that would determine the future of multiple careers. In the barracks, 7 men showered and joked and prepared for a debrief they thought would be routine. And in the space between those two realities, the universe was preparing to deliver a lesson about respect, assumptions, and the cost of judging a warrior by her wounds rather than her scars. The clock was ticking. The Naval, Amphibious base Little Creek dining facility was already humming with activity by 0615 hours. Early morning PT groups filed in wearing matching unit shirts, their faces flushed from runs along the beach. Support staff grabbed quick breakfasts before heading to their duty stations. And in the corner booth traditionally claimed by SEAL teams, Lieutenant Commander Marcus Dalton's crew spread out like they owned the place. Trays loaded with eggs, bacon, hash browns, and enough carbohydrates to fuel a small army. "I'm telling you," Derek Chun said through a mouthful of scrambled eggs, That woman we saw had to be here for a psych eval. That's the only reason Army comes to our medical facility. When their own docs can't clear them, they shop around for someone who will. Tyler Brooks nodded, dumping hot sauce on everything. My cousin's Army. He says they've got quotas now for women in combat roles. Doesn't matter if they can't perform. They push them through anyway, then act surprised when they break down. That's not exactly fair, Kevin Park started. But Andre Washington cut him off with a dismissive wave. Kid, you've been on the teams for what, 8 months? Let the adults talk. Washington leaned back, his voice carrying to nearby tables. I've been doing this for 20 years. Seen every type that comes through. And I'm telling you, that woman couldn't hack it, written all over her. The limp, the cane, the victim walk. I've seen it 100 times. Brandon Cole, the medic, kept his eyes on his breakfast. He'd noticed something Washington and the others hadn't. The way the woman had moved wasn't the gait of someone exaggerating an injury. It was the movement pattern of someone with severe lower extremity trauma, possibly blast-related given the specific combination of compensations. Her right leg drag suggested nerve damage. The cane wasn't for show. It was preventing complete leg collapse, but Cole had learned long ago that medical expertise wasn't valued when it contradicted the team's narrative. So he stayed quiet and ate his eggs. James Mitchell pulled out his phone, scrolling through social media. You know what kills me? These people get injured in training. Not even combat, and suddenly they're writing books about their service. Doing motivational speaking tours, acting like heroes. Meanwhile, actual operators who've done actual things can't say a word because it's all classified, Sean added. And who gets the glory? People who couldn't cut it. A nearby table of Navy corpsmen looked over, one of them frowning. Hospital Corpsman Second Class Maria Santos had been listening to the conversation with growing irritation. She'd seen that injured woman too, had actually held the door open for her at the medical building. Up close, Santos had noticed details the SEALs hadn't: the faded combat patch, the thin white scars visible on her forearms, the way her hands shook slightly from what looked like nerve damage. Santos knew trauma when she saw it. And that woman wasn't faking anything. But Santos also knew better than to challenge a SEAL team in the middle of the dining facility. That was a fight nobody won. So she filed the observation away and returned to her own breakfast, though her jaw remained tight. Marcus Dalton checked his watch. All right, gentlemen, we've got 30 minutes before debrief. Let's talk about this morning's meeting. Commander Bryant wants a full after-action report on the swamp training evolution. Washington, you're presenting the navigation challenges. Chun, you've got the communications breakdown on day 2. Brooks, equipment failures. Park, you're taking notes. What's the meeting format? Park asked, pulling out a small notebook. Standard debrief. Probably just us and Commander Bryant. Maybe a couple staff officers. In and out in an hour. Then we've got the rest of the day to recover before next week's dive training. Dalton sipped his coffee. Easy day. Think they'll bring up the rescue drill timing? Mitchell asked. We were 3 minutes over target. That was weather-related, Washington said firmly. Wind conditions changed the helicopter approach. Not our fault. The conversation shifted to technical details of the training evolution insertion methods, equipment performance, team coordination, standard operator talk, the kind of detailed tactical analysis that happened after every training event. They were good at what they did, these 7 men. Highly trained, extensively experienced, capable of extraordinary things in extreme conditions. But right now, in this moment, they were also supremely confident in their own judgment. And that confidence was built on a foundation of assumptions they'd never questioned about who belonged in special operations, about what real operators looked like, about who deserved respect and who didn't. Tyler Brooks glanced toward the dining facility entrance, and his eyes widened. "No way, is that her again?" The woman from the parking lot stood at the entrance, scanning the room. In the better lighting of the dining facility, more details were visible. She wore no rank insignia on her uniform, which struck several of the SEALs as odd. Her name tape read simply Cross in faded black letters. And that combat patch on her right shoulder, while still too worn to read clearly, definitely wasn't standard Army issue. She spotted the coffee station, made her way over with that same painful limp, and began preparing a cup with her free hand while the cane hung from her wrist. "She's following us," Chun joked. "Maybe she wants an autograph. Or she's trying to figure out how real operators carry themselves so she can fake it better," Brooks added. Grinning, Washington's voice carried across the dining facility, intentionally loud. "Some people collect disability checks. Others earn their pay. Guess which category she falls into." This time the woman did react. Her hand paused for just a fraction of a second while pouring coffee. Then she finished, capped the cup, and turned to face their table directly. For 5 long seconds, she simply looked at them. Her expression wasn't angry or hurt or defensive. It was something else entirely, an assessment, cold and professional. The way a predator evaluates potential threats and dismisses them as non-viable. Then she turned and walked out, coffee in hand, without saying a single word. "Ice cold," Mitchell said, impressed despite himself. "Didn't even flinch." "That's not ice cold, that's medicated," Washington countered. "Probably on so many painkillers she doesn't feel anything." Maria Santos stood up from her table, her breakfast unfinished. She'd had enough. Walking past the SEAL team's table, she stopped just long enough to say quietly, "You boys might want to learn someone's story before you write it for them." Then she left. Following the injured woman out of the dining facility, Washington rolled his eyes. "Great. Now the corpsmen are getting sensitive too. What's next? Mandatory feelings training?" "Probably," Dalton said, standing and gathering his tray. "Which is exactly why we need to maintain standards. The day we start worrying about hurting feelings is the day we stop being effective. Now come on, we've got 15 minutes to get to the conference room." The team disposed of their trays and headed out into the brightening morning. The Virginia sun was fully up now, promising another hot, humid day. Across the base, personnel moved with purpose and toward training areas. Some toward offices, some toward the flight line where helicopters were already spinning up for morning operations. None of the 7 SEALs noticed that the injured woman had stopped outside the dining facility, leaning against the brick wall with her eyes closed, breathing carefully through what was clearly a pain spike. None of them saw Maria Santos approach her with a concerned expression, or the brief conversation that followed, or the way the woman straightened with visible effort and continued toward the medical building. None of them wondered why an injured Army soldier would need to be at the base. Commander's conference room building. None of them questioned why someone who was supposedly just seeking medical attention would be carrying a secure briefing folder under her arm. None of them had learned the first rule of intelligence gathering. Assumptions are the enemy of truth. And in exactly 12 minutes, when they walked through the conference room door, expecting a routine training debrief, they would learn that lesson in the most humiliating way possible. The clock was still ticking. And the woman they'd dismissed, the soldier they'd mocked, the warrior they'd judged by her injuries rather than her service, was already in the conference room waiting for them. The conference room and building, 1847 at Naval Amphibious Base. Little Creek was known informally as the Woodshed, a place where careers were made or broken, where operational plans were approved or torn apart, where commanders delivered both commendations and career-ending reprimands. The room itself was unremarkable, a long mahogany table surrounded by leather chairs. An American flag in one corner, a Navy flag in the other, and walls lined with photographs of distinguished naval officers dating back to World War. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Dalton had been in this room dozens of times over his 12-year career. He'd received his Silver Star here after a particularly hairy extraction in Yemen. He'd briefed admirals on training innovations. He'd sat through countless operational reviews, safety stand-downs, and strategic planning sessions. The room held no mysteries for him, no anxiety. Today was supposed to be routine. His team filed in at exactly 0645 hours, 15 minutes early as per military custom. The conference room was empty except for a single folder placed at the head of the table, a standard manila folder with a red classified stripe across the top. Dalton noted it, but didn't think much of it. Training evolutions often generated classified after-action reports, especially when they involved testing new equipment or tactics. "Grab seats on the left side," Dalton instructed his team. "Command staff will sit on the right. Washington, you're presenting first, so sit closest to the head of the table." Andre Washington took the indicated seat, pulling out his tablet with the navigation presentation already loaded. Derek Chun and Tyler Brooks sat beside him, comparing notes on their own presentation materials. Brandon Cole settled in quietly, his medical report ready, but hoping he wouldn't need to address the controversy about the team member who'd suffered heat exhaustion on day 2, a preventable incident that Cole had warned about before the evolution began. Kevin Park took a seat near the far end, still the junior officer, still learning the rhythms of team dynamics. James Mitchell sat beside him, already looking half asleep despite the strong coffee. "Anyone know if this is just Commander Bryant or if the old man's sitting in?" Brooks asked, referring to Captain Dennis Hargrove, the commanding officer of Naval Special Warfare Group 2. Bryant's email just said Command Staff Review. Dalton replied, reviewing his own notes on his phone. "Could be anyone from the group commander down. Doesn't matter. We ran a solid evolution. A few minor issues to address, but overall it was a success." The door opened and Commander Robert Bryant entered, followed by 2 staff officers Dalton didn't immediately recognize, a Navy lieutenant commander and an Army major. The presence of Army personnel was unusual but not unprecedented. Joint service operations often required cross-branch coordination and observation. Then Captain Hargrove walked in, his weathered face unreadable. At 52, Hargrove was a legend in the SEAL community, 3 decades of service, multiple combat deployments, a reputation for being fair but absolutely uncompromising. When it came to standards and conduct, Dalton and his team stood immediately, coming to attention. "Seats, gentlemen," Hargrove said, his voice carrying the gravelly texture of a man who'd spent too many years in desert environments, breathing dust and smoke. He moved to the head of the table, but didn't sit. Remaining standing with his hands clasped behind his back, Commander Bryant closed the door and took a position by the flag. His expression troubled in a way that made Dalton's instincts prickle with the first hint of unease. "Gentlemen," Hargrove began, "this meeting is not what you were expecting. The training evolution debrief has been postponed." Dalton's stomach tightened. Postponed meetings were never good news. "Sir, if there's an issue with our performance, there is an issue, Lieutenant Commander. But it has nothing to do with your tactical performance in the swamps." Hargrove's gaze swept across the 7 SEALs with an intensity that made even Washington sit up straighter. "It has to do with your performance this morning in the parking lot and the dining facility." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I expect a direct answer," Hargrove continued. "At approximately 0547 hours this morning, did you and your team observe an injured female soldier in Army uniform walking through the base parking lot?" Dalton's mind raced, trying to understand where this was going. "Yes, sir." We saw an Army soldier heading toward the medical building. And did you or any member of your team make comments about this soldier? The room fell into the kind of silence that screamed guilt. Dalton felt sweat beginning to form on his back, despite the air conditioning. Sir, there may have been some casual observations. Casual observations. Hargrove's voice was flat, dangerous. Commander Bryant, would you characterize what was reported to me as casual observations? Bryant stepped forward, pulling out a small notebook. According to Hospital Corpsman Second Class Maria Santos, who was present in the dining facility, she heard multiple members of SEAL Team 5 make the following statements. He began reading from his notes. Army plane dress-up on our base. Probably got injured doing desk work and needs a Navy doc to hold her hand. Probably hurt herself on a morning jog and decided to make a career out of it. Got hurt in training, couldn't hack it. Now she's collecting disability. Army Rangers probably rejected her. So she's shopping for sympathy from Navy docs. Bryant looked up from his notes. Should I continue? Because Corpsman Santos documented 6 more similar comments, including speculation about psychological evaluations, disability fraud, and women being pushed through combat training despite being unable to perform. The 7 SEALs sat frozen. Park's face had gone pale. Cole was staring at the table. Washington's jaw was set in a defensive line. Chun and Brooks exchanged worried glances. Mitchell looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. Only Dalton maintained eye contact with Hargrove, though it cost him. Sir, we didn't mean any disrespect. We were just what? Hargrove's voice cracked like a whip. Just making assumptions about someone's service based on their gender? Just mocking an injured soldier for using a cane? Just demonstrating the exact kind of toxic behavior that this community has been working for years to eliminate. Captain, with respect, Washington spoke up, his voice carrying an edge of defensiveness. We see stolen valor cases all the time. People faking injuries, exaggerating service, looking for sympathy and benefits they didn't earn. You were just demonstrating poor judgment, Senior Chief. Hargrove cut him off. Did you verify this soldier's credentials? Did you ask about her service? Did you show even basic military courtesy to a fellow service member? Silence. That's what I thought. Hargrove picked up the classified folder from the table. This morning, you dismissed, mocked, and disrespected a soldier based entirely on her appearance. You made assumptions about her capabilities, her service, and her character without a single piece of actual evidence. You behaved, frankly, like entitled children rather than professional operators. The Army major who'd been standing quietly by the door finally spoke. His voice was soft but carried a weight that made everyone turn to look at him. Gentlemen, I'm Major David Chun, United States Army Special Operations Command. I was asked to be present for this meeting because the soldier you encountered this morning falls under my command structure. Army Special Operations? Tyler Brooks said, unable to hide his surprise. That's correct, Major Chun replied. The soldier you saw, the one you assumed was a desk worker seeking sympathy, the one you mocked for using a cane, she's not here for a medical evaluation. She's here for a classified briefing that involves joint Navy-Army operations. Dalton felt the bottom dropping out of his stomach. Sir, we had no way of knowing. No way of knowing? Hargrove's voice was ice. You had every way of knowing. You could have shown basic respect. You could have minded your own business. You could have remembered that wearing the uniform, regardless of branch or condition, deserves a baseline level of professional courtesy. Commander Bryant spoke again, his disappointment evident in every word. What makes this particularly egregious, gentlemen, is that you're SEALs. You're supposed to be the best. You're supposed to demonstrate the judgment, discretion, and professionalism that separates special operations from conventional forces. Instead, you behaved like bullies in a high school cafeteria. The door opened again. And the 7 SEALs turned to see who was entering. It was her. The injured woman from the parking lot walked in slowly, still using the cane, still moving with that painful, deliberate gait. She'd removed her patrol cap, revealing dark hair pulled back in a tight bun and a face that, in the better lighting of the conference room, showed evidence of old scarring along her left jawline. Her uniform was now clearly visible as lacking not just rank insignia, but any identifying patches, except for that faded combat patch on her right shoulder. She moved to a position beside Major Chun, came to a modified position of attention that accommodated her injuries, and waited. Every SEAL in the room felt their throat go dry. "Gentlemen," Captain Hargrove said, his voice carrying a tone that promised this meeting was about to get much, much worse. "I'd like to introduce the soldier you've spent the morning disrespecting." The woman's dark eyes swept across the 7 men, and in that gaze was something that made even battle-hardened SEALs want to look away. Not anger, not judgment, but something more unsettling: recognition. The look of someone who'd already sized them up, found them wanting, and dismissed them as irrelevant. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence said everything. And in the terrible silence that followed, Lieutenant Commander Marcus Dalton finally understood that his routine training, debrief, had just become the worst day of his military career. Captain Hargrove gestured toward the woman standing beside Major Chun. "This is Chief Warrant Officer 3 Elena Cross, United States Army, assigned to the 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta." The words hit the room like a flashbang grenade. Delta Force, the Army's most elite Tier 1 Special Operations Unit. The operators who didn't exist in official records, who conducted missions that never made the news, who were selected from the absolute best of the already exceptional Army Special Forces and Rangers. Tyler Brooks made a small choking sound. Derek Chun's face had gone from confident to ashen in 3 seconds flat. Even Andre Washington, who never looked rattled, sat perfectly still with his hands gripped together on the table. "Chief Cross is here," Hargrove continued, his voice dangerously calm, "because she was invited to participate in a classified briefing regarding joint maritime counterterrorism operations. A briefing that involves potential cooperation between Naval Special Warfare and Army Special Operations Command. A briefing that was scheduled to begin at 0700 hours in this very room." He paused, letting that information sink in. Chief Cross arrived on base early this morning after driving 4 hours from Fort Bragg despite significant injuries sustained during classified operations. Injuries that include a shattered tibia, partial nerve damage to her right leg, and soft tissue trauma that required 3 reconstructive surgeries over the past 8 months. Elena Cross remained silent, her expression neutral, but her eyes never left the SEAL team. Marcus Dalton found himself unable to hold her gaze. There was something in those dark eyes that spoke of things seen and done that went beyond anything he'd experienced. And the weight of that knowledge was crushing. "Chief Cross," Hargrove said, turning to her, "would you like to address these gentlemen?" "With respect, Captain, I don't think that's necessary," Elena replied. Her voice was quiet but carried the kind of authority that didn't need volume. "They've already made their assessment of me. I'm not here to change their minds." "Nevertheless," Major Chun interjected, "I think it's important that they understand exactly who they've spent the morning disparaging." Elena shifted her weight slightly, a movement that suggested pain management, though her face showed nothing. "Very well, sir." She turned her full attention to the 7 SEALs, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop further. "My name is Elena Cross. I've been in the Army for 14 years. I served 3 years as a military police officer before being selected for Special Forces assessment and selection in 2016, when the Army first opened combat roles to women. I was one of 4 women to attempt the course that year. I was the only one to graduate." She spoke without emotion, reciting facts like a mission brief. I spent 2 years with 3rd Special Forces Group before being selected for Combat Applications Group evaluation. I passed the operator training course in 2019 and was assigned to a Delta Assault Troop. Over the past 5 years, I've conducted operations in 13 countries across 4 continents. Most of those operations remain classified and will likely stay that way for the next 30 years. Kevin Park was staring at her with something approaching awe. Brandon Cole, the medic, was studying her visible injuries with new understanding, clearly reassessing everything he'd observed that morning. The injuries you saw, Elena continued, were sustained during a building assault in a location I cannot name. An IED detonated during our breach. The blast killed 2 of my teammates instantly and wounded 3 others. I was the assault element medic. Despite my own injuries, I provided trauma care to the other wounded operators while under continuous small arms fire, until our support element could extract us. The room was so quiet that the hum of the air conditioning seemed deafening. I spent 4 months at Walter Reed Medical Center. Doctors told me I'd never walk without assistance again, that my combat career was over, that I should accept medical retirement and move on with my life. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I disagreed. I spent the next 4 months in physical therapy, relearning how to walk, how to run, how to carry a rifle. I'm not at 100%. I may never be at 100%. But I'm functional, I'm operational. And I'm still serving. She paused, and for the first time, something like emotion crept into her voice, not anger, but something colder. This morning, while I was walking to the medical building to have my doctors clear me for this briefing, I heard 7 Navy SEALs men who are supposed to represent the pinnacle of military professionalism make assumptions about my service based on nothing more than my gender and my injuries. You assumed I was weak. You assumed I was faking. You assumed I couldn't hack it. You assumed I was looking for sympathy or trying to game the system for disability benefits. Marcus Dalton wanted to sink through his chair and disappear into the floor. Beside him, Andre Washington's face had gone from defensive to something approaching horror as the full weight of their mistake became clear. You didn't ask my name, Elena continued. You didn't ask my rank. You didn't show even basic military courtesy. You saw someone who didn't fit your preconceived notion of what a warrior looks like, and you dismissed me. You mocked me. You made me into a joke to entertain yourselves while you ate breakfast. Ma'am, Dalton started, his voice hoarse. We had no idea. No, Elena cut him off. And the sharpness in that single word made him shut his mouth immediately. You had no idea because you didn't ask. You didn't verify. You didn't investigate. You saw surface details and made sweeping judgments. And if that's how you operate in your professional capacity, then I have serious concerns about your judgment in operational environments. The words landed like physical blows. Commander Bryant shifted uncomfortably by the flag. Major Chun's expression was grim. Captain Hargrove stood with his arms crossed, letting Elena's words do the work his own couldn't. I've worked with Navy SEALs before, Elena said. Good operators. Professional, skilled. Men who understood that special operations is about the mission, not about ego or prejudice. Men who judged their teammates by capability, not appearance. Men who understood that the enemy doesn't care about your gender, your size, or whether you fit some Hollywood stereotype of what a warrior should look like. The enemy only cares whether you can complete the mission. She took a careful breath, managing pain that was clearly significant despite her controlled demeanor. This morning, you failed that standard. You let your biases override your judgment. You let your assumptions blind you to reality. And you demonstrated exactly the kind of toxic mindset that keeps qualified people out of special operations, that drives away talented operators who don't fit the traditional mold. and that ultimately makes our entire community weaker. Tyler Brooks looked like he might be sick. James Mitchell was staring at his hands. Derek Chun had tears forming in his eyes, though whether from shame or something else, it was impossible to tell. "Ma'am," Kevin Park said quietly, "I want to apologize. I knew it was wrong, and I didn't speak up. That makes me just as guilty as everyone else here." Elena looked at him for a long moment. "Knowing something is wrong and staying silent isn't as bad as participating, Lieutenant. But it's not good either. In special operations, we depend on team members to speak up when something's wrong, to challenge bad decisions, to maintain standards even when it's uncomfortable. You saw your teammates behaving inappropriately, and you said nothing. That's a leadership failure." Park nodded, accepting the criticism without argument. Andre Washington finally found his voice. "Chief Cross, I was the one who made the comment about desk work and medical attention. That was wrong. I was wrong. I have no excuse." "You're right," Elena said flatly. "You have no excuse. You have 20 years of service. You should know better. The fact that you don't suggests either a fundamental character flaw or a cultural problem in your team that's gone unaddressed for too long." Washington flinched as if she'd slapped him. Captain Hargrove stepped forward. "Gentlemen, Chief Cross has been more than gracious in addressing you directly. She could have simply filed a formal complaint, which would have triggered an investigation that could have ended multiple careers. Instead, she agreed to this face-to-face meeting on the condition that we use it as a teaching moment." "Sir," Marcus Dalton said, his voice steadier now even as his internal world was collapsing, "we owe Chief Cross an apology that goes beyond words. Our behavior was inexcusable. We failed to uphold the standards of our community, and we failed to show respect to a fellow operator who has earned it many times over." "Your apology is noted," Hargrove said coldly. "But apologies don't fix the damage. They don't undo the disrespect. And they certainly don't restore confidence in your judgment." He moved to stand directly in front of the table, forcing all 7 SEALs to look up at him. "Here's what's going to happen," Hargrove said. "Each of you will write a formal letter of apology to Chief Cross. Those letters will become part of your permanent record. Each of you will undergo mandatory training on professional conduct, unconscious bias, and appropriate military behavior. Senior Chief Washington and Lieutenant Commander Dalton, as team leadership, will face additional review by the group commander to determine if you're suitable to continue in your current positions." The weight of those consequences settled over the room like a heavy fog. "Furthermore," Hargrove continued, "the classified briefing that was supposed to happen this morning will proceed as scheduled, but with a modification. SEAL Team 5 will participate as observers only, not contributors. You will sit in this room and watch Chief Cross brief her operational experience and tactical recommendations to senior leadership. You will listen to her expertise. You will take notes. And you will learn something about judgment, humility, and what it actually means to be a professional special operator." "Sir," Commander Bryant added, "this incident will also be presented as a case study to all SEAL teams in the group, not with names, but with enough detail that everyone understands what happened and why it was unacceptable. This kind of behavior stops here today." Elena Cross shifted her weight again, her knuckles white on the cane handle. The pain she was managing was clearly significant. Yet she'd stood through this entire confrontation without complaint, without asking to sit, maintaining a dignity and bearing that shamed every man in the room. "Chief Cross," Major Chen said gently, "you should sit down. You've been standing too long." "I'm fine, sir," Elena replied, but her voice had tightened in a way that suggested otherwise. Brandon Cole, the SEAL medic, stood up slowly. "Ma'am, with your permission, and acknowledging that I have absolutely no right to offer given my behavior this morning, you should elevate that leg." The way you're compensating suggests significant inflammation in your lower extremity. Standing for extended periods is only making it worse." Elena looked at him with an expression that was hard to read. "You noticed that?" "In the parking lot, yes, ma'am. I noticed the gait pattern, the pain management behaviors, the specific injury compensations." I said nothing. Cole's voice was thick with shame. "I'm a combat medic. I'm trained to identify and treat injuries. I saw that you were managing significant trauma, and instead of offering assistance or respect, I stayed silent while my teammates mocked you. That's a failure of my medical ethics as much as my military bearing." For the first time since entering the room, Elena's expression softened slightly. "At least one of you was paying attention." "Too little too late, ma'am." "Yes," Elena agreed. "But it's something." She moved carefully to the nearest chair and lowered herself into it, the relief evident despite her attempts to hide it. The simple act of sitting revealed just how much pain she'd been managing, how much effort it had taken to stand before them and deliver her statement with unwavering dignity, and watching her finally allow herself that small concession. Seeing the toll that standing had taken made their morning mockery seem even more cruel, even more unforgivable. The clock on the wall showed 07:03 hours. 3 minutes passed when the classified briefing should have begun. 3 minutes into what would become the longest, most uncomfortable, and most educational day of SEAL Team 5's careers. Captain Hargrove opened the classified folder. "The briefing will begin in 5 minutes. Use that time to get your head straight. When senior leadership arrives, you will maintain absolute professionalism. You will listen. You will learn. And you will think very carefully about what kind of operators you want to be going forward." He looked at each of them in turn, his gaze lingering longest on Marcus Dalton. "Because right now, gentlemen, I'm not impressed with what I see." The 5 minutes passed in suffocating silence. The 7 SEALs sat motionless, each man alone with his thoughts, drowning in a mixture of shame, disbelief, and the dawning realization that their casual cruelty had consequences far beyond what they'd imagined. Marcus Dalton kept his eyes fixed on the polished surface of the conference table, seeing his own distorted reflection staring back at him with an expression he barely recognized. Elena Cross sat at the head of the table now, her injured leg elevated slightly on a second chair that Brandon Cole had quietly positioned for her without being asked. She'd accepted the gesture with a small nod, nothing more. Her hands rested on the table, palms down, and for the first time, the SEALs could see them clearly in the harsh, fluorescent lighting. The hands told a story their eyes had been too blind to read that morning. Kevin Park found himself staring at those hands, unable to look away. The knuckles were scarred, not the casual scars from gym training or recreational fighting, but the deep tissue scarring that came from repeated hard impacts against unforgiving surfaces. Breaching doors. Hand-to-hand combat. The kind of damage that accumulated over years of violent professional work. Between her thumb and index finger on her right hand, a distinctive triangular scar caught the light. Park had seen that exact scar pattern before. It was the result of slide bite from a pistol, usually a 1911 or similar platform. It happened to new shooters who gripped the weapon incorrectly, letting the slide catch the webbing of their hand during recoil. But the scar tissue on Elena's hand wasn't from a single incident. It was built up, layered, suggesting hundreds or thousands of rounds, fired before proper grip technique was mastered. She'd learned to shoot by doing it wrong first, by bleeding, by adapting, by continuing despite the pain until her body learned the correct mechanics. That wasn't the hand of someone who'd taken a weekend shooting course. It was the hand of someone who'd put in the brutal hours necessary to become truly proficient. Her left hand showed different damage. The pinky finger sat at a slight angle, evidence of an old break that hadn't healed perfectly straight. 2 of her fingernails had the discolored, slightly irregular appearance of regrowth, after traumatic loss. And across her palm, a thick rope of scar tissue ran diagonally, the kind of injury that came from gripping something rough under extreme stress. Probably during a fast rope insertion or emergency extraction. Tyler Brooks followed Park's gaze and felt his stomach turn. He'd spent the morning assuming this woman was soft, fragile, someone playing at being a soldier. Now, looking at her hands, really seeing them, he understood that Elena Cross had paid for her place in special operations with blood, pain, and a level of dedication that made his own sacrifice seem trivial by comparison. The door opened and the room snapped to attention as Rear Admiral Patricia Knowles entered, followed by Colonel James Rutherford from Army Special Operations Command, Commander Sarah Mitchell from Naval Special Warfare Development Group, and two officers whose rank insignia marked them as intelligence community representatives. "Seats," Admiral Knowles said crisply. She was in her late 50s, carrying herself with the confidence of someone who'd risen through the ranks in an era when women flag officers were rare enough to be remarkable. Her presence at this briefing signaled just how important the joint operations discussion actually was. The Admiral's eyes swept the room, noting the tension, the positioning, the way the SEAL team sat separately from the command staff like children relegated to the corner for misbehavior. Her eyebrow raised a fraction of an inch. She knew something was wrong. But this wasn't the moment to address it. "Chief Cross," Admiral Knowles said warmly, moving to shake Elena's hand as the injured operator stood carefully. "Thank you for making the drive. I know it's not easy given your current recovery status." "It's an honor to be here, ma'am," Elena replied, her voice steady. "I've read your after-action reports from Objective Redstone," the Admiral continued, using what was clearly a code name for the operation where Elena had been injured. "Exceptional work under impossible circumstances. The intelligence you secured during that operation has already generated 3 follow-on missions and potentially saved dozens of American lives. My team did that work, ma'am. I was just the one who made it out to file the report." Admiral Knowles' expression softened. "I also read the casualty reports. Sergeant First Class Marcus Thompson and Staff Sergeant Jennifer Reyes. I'm sorry for your loss." Elena's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "They were the best of us, ma'am." The Admiral nodded, then turned to address the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're here to discuss joint maritime counterterrorism capabilities. Specifically, we're exploring how Army Special Operations units can support naval special warfare missions in littoral environments, and vice versa. Chief Cross has direct operational experience in this area, having participated in 3 joint operations over the past 18 months. She gestured toward Elena. "Chief Cross will brief her experience, lessons learned, and recommendations for future joint operations doctrine. Following her presentation, we'll break into working groups to discuss integration challenges and training requirements." Admiral Knowles took her seat at the head of the table, with Colonel Rutherford beside her. The other senior officers arranged themselves accordingly. The 7 SEALs from Team 5 remained at the far end of the table, observers rather than participants, their usual confidence replaced by acute awareness of their diminished status. Elena stood carefully, using the table for support as she moved to the front of the room where a large monitor displayed a title slide. "Joint Littoral Operations, Army-Navy Integration Lessons from Recent Operations." Her limp was pronounced as she positioned herself, but she moved with practiced efficiency. Someone who'd learned to work through pain as a matter of routine. She picked up a remote control with her scarred right hand and advanced to the first slide. "Ma'am." "Sirs, thank you for the opportunity to brief today," Elena began, her voice taking on the professional cadence of someone accustomed to delivering mission briefings. "I'm going to discuss 3 specific operations where Delta assault elements worked in direct support of naval special warfare objectives. These operations occurred between January 2023 and November 2024 in locations cannot specify beyond saying they involved maritime environments in denied territories. The first slide showed a tactical map with most identifying details redacted, showing only the basic geography, a coastline, a river system, an urban area. Operation Copper Shield. January 2023, Alana continued. Mission objective was to capture a high-value target who was utilizing maritime smuggling routes to move personnel and equipment. Naval intelligence identified the target's vessel and movement patterns. SEAL elements were tasked with maritime interdiction. My Delta troop was tasked with landside support in case the target went to ground in the urban environment. She clicked to the next slide, showing a timeline of events. The operation began as planned. SEAL elements executed a textbook maritime interception, boarded the vessel, and secured 4 hostile individuals. However, the high-value target was not on board. He'd received warning and had already moved to a safe house 3 kilometers inland. The SEAL element lacked ground mobility assets and area familiarity. My element was positioned to support. Derek Chun found himself leaning forward despite his shame, his operational mind engaging with the tactical problem. This was the kind of real-world mission complexity that training evolutions never quite captured. The moment when the plan broke down and operators had to adapt in real time. The challenge, Elena said, was communication. SEAL elements operate on specific radio frequencies and use naval special warfare communication protocols. Army Special Operations use different frequencies and different protocols. In the heat of the operation, we experienced a 7-minute communication gap where neither element could talk to the other directly. We had to relay through higher headquarters, which added dangerous delays. She clicked to another slide showing a communication architecture diagram. 7 minutes doesn't sound like much. But when you have a time-sensitive target who's actively trying to escape, 7 minutes can mean mission failure. In this case, we got lucky. The target's safe house was further inland than he could reach in the available time window. My element was able to move to the location and establish containment before he arrived. Admiral Knowles interjected. What was the outcome? Target was captured without casualties to friendly forces or civilians, ma'am. Mission success. But it was closer than it should have been, and the communication gap was a critical vulnerability that could have resulted in disaster. Elena advanced to the next slide, showing technical specifications for different radio systems. Lesson learned. Joint operations require joint communication systems. We can't rely on relay through higher headquarters when time is critical. Following Copper Shield, my unit and SEAL Team 3 conducted joint training to develop shared communication protocols and to cross-train operators on each service's radio systems. She paused, shifting her weight slightly to manage the pain in her leg. This brings me to a broader point about joint operations. The most significant barrier isn't tactical or technical, it's cultural. Navy and Army Special Operations have different traditions, different terminology, different approaches to problem solving. Those differences can be strengths if we leverage them properly. But they become weaknesses when we let service rivalry or prejudice override professional cooperation. The words hung in the air. Several of the senior officers glanced toward the SEAL Team 5 personnel, who sat frozen in their seats. Elena hadn't looked at them directly, but the message was clear enough. She continued to the next operation, describing a river interdiction mission in Southeast Asia where Army boats and Navy SEALs had worked together to disrupt a weapons smuggling network. The briefing was detailed, professional, and demonstrated a level of operational experience that was undeniable. She spoke about tactical decisions, equipment challenges, personnel coordination, and the kind of split-second judgment calls that separated successful operations from disasters. Commander Sarah Mitchell, the DeviGru representative, asked several technical questions about small boat operations and riverine navigation. Elena answered each one with precise detail, describing water currents, visibility conditions, weapon mounting configurations, and communication procedures. It was clear she wasn't reciting from a textbook. This was hard-won knowledge from actual operations. Brandon Cole, the SEAL medic, found himself taking notes despite their observer status. The medical evacuation procedures Elena described for riverine environments were more sophisticated than anything in his current training. She'd clearly learned these lessons the hard way, probably by treating wounded teammates in conditions where standard medical protocols were impossible. The third operation Elena briefed involved a hostage rescue in an unnamed African country. The tactical complexity was staggering: multiple hostile groups, uncertain ally reliability, extreme time pressure, and an urban environment where civilian casualties were a significant concern. Army and Navy elements had worked together to isolate the building, breach the defenses, extract the hostages, and evacuate under fire. The operation was successful, Elena said, showing a slide with basic outcome metrics. All hostages recovered alive. No friendly casualties, hostile casualties within acceptable parameters. But success came at a cost that doesn't show up in the statistics. She clicked to a new slide that simply read, Human Factors. During the initial breach, our team medic was wounded by fragmentation from a defensive grenade. She was able to continue functioning, but her mobility was compromised. The Navy corpsman attached to the SEAL element immediately crossed from his position to provide support, exposing himself to hostile fire to reach a wounded operator from a different service. Elena's voice tightened slightly. That corpsman's name was Petty Officer First Class Robert Chun. He was killed by sniper fire while rendering aid to my teammate. He died protecting an Army operator he'd never met before that mission, because that's what professionals do. They don't see service branches. They see teammates. The room was absolutely silent. Several of the senior officers looked visibly moved. At the far end of the table, Derek Chun's hands were shaking. The story hit too close to home. A different Chun, a different scenario. But the same fundamental lesson about loyalty, transcending arbitrary divisions. Elena advanced to her final slide, recommendations for future joint operations. First, establish joint training rotations where Army and Navy Special Operations units work together before deploying together. Familiarity breeds trust, and trust is essential in high-risk environments. Second, develop standardized communication protocols that work across services. Technical interoperability is pointless if our operators can't talk to each other effectively. Third, and most important, she paused, looking directly at the senior officers. Address cultural barriers head-on. Create opportunities for operators to see each other as professionals first, service members second. Break down the stereotypes and prejudices that undermine unit cohesion. She set down the remote. The presentation complete. Ma'am, sirs, that concludes my brief. I'm available for questions. Admiral Knowles stood, initiating applause that the other senior officers immediately joined. Outstanding brief. Chief Cross, exactly the kind of real-world insight we need to develop better joint operations doctrine. Colonel Rutherford added, I'd like to schedule follow-up discussions about incorporating your recommendations into formal training programs. This is too valuable not to disseminate widely. As the senior officers began discussing next steps, the 7 SEALs sat in their observer seats. Having just watched a masterclass in professionalism, operational expertise, and grace under pressure delivered by the woman they'd spent the morning dismissing as weak and incompetent, the lesson wasn't subtle, and it was far from over. Admiral Knowles checked her watch and addressed the room. We'll take a 15-minute break before moving into working group discussions. Chief Cross, excellent work. Please take the opportunity to rest that leg. As the senior officers filed out, discussing the briefing in low voices, Captain Hargrove remained behind. He moved to the front of the room where Elena was carefully lowering herself back into her chair. The exertion of standing for 30 minutes clearly taking its toll. "Chief Cross," Hargrove said quietly, "a word before the break ends?" "Of course, sir." Hargrove glanced at the 7 SEALs still seated at the far end of the table. "You men stay put. Don't leave this room." Once he was certain they wouldn't be overheard by passing personnel in the hallway. Hargrove turned back to Elena. "I want you to know that what happened this morning does not represent the values of naval special warfare. Those men failed to meet our standards, and they're being held accountable." Elena nodded slowly. "I appreciate that, Captain. But with respect, this isn't the first time I've encountered this attitude, and it won't be the last. The problem isn't 7 individual SEALs. The problem is systemic. Explain." "Sir, I've been doing this for 5 years now. 5 years of proving myself over and over again. Every new unit, every new operation, every new teammate, it starts the same way. They see a woman, they make assumptions, and I have to demonstrate my competence before they'll accept that I belong. Men in special operations get the benefit of the doubt based on their credentials. Women have to earn it through repeated demonstration." Hargrove's jaw tightened. "You're right. And that's unacceptable." "It is what it is," Elena said with a slight shrug. "I stopped expecting fairness a long time ago. Now I just focus on the mission. If my teammates don't trust me at the start, they usually do by the end. That's good enough. It shouldn't have to be." "No, sir. It shouldn't. But we don't get to choose the world we operate in. We only get to choose how we respond to it." Hargrove studied her for a long moment. "How's your leg really doing? And I want an honest answer, not the official one." Elena hesitated, then gave him the truth. "It's manageable. Some days are better than others. Today is not a good day. Driving for 4 hours and then standing for extended periods isn't ideal. But I've had worse. I'll be fine." "The Army doctors cleared you for operational status?" "Conditional clearance. Light duty for another 3 months, then reassessment. They're optimistic about full recovery eventually, but eventually is a flexible timeline, and you're pushing that timeline." "I'm an operator, sir. Pushing timelines is what we do." Despite the seriousness of the conversation, Hargrove's mouth quirked in something that might have been a smile. "Fair point. For what it's worth, your briefing was exceptional. Admiral Knowles was impressed, and she's not easily impressed." "Thank you, sir. I just reported what happened and what we learned. The real credit belongs to the operators who were there with me, including the 2 who didn't make it home." Elena's expression hardened slightly. "Especially them." The door opened and Commander Bryant returned, carrying 2 bottles of water. He handed one to Elena and one to Hargrove. "Senior leadership is gathering in the adjacent conference room. They want Chief Cross to join them for the working group discussion. The question is what to do with our SEAL team." Hargrove looked at the 7 men still seated at the far end of the table. They'd been sitting in silence for the past 10 minutes, not talking, not looking at each other, just existing in their shared humiliation. They stay here, Hargrove decided. This room becomes their professional development classroom for the rest of the day. They're going to write their letters of apology, and then they're going to write detailed self-assessments about what they did wrong and how they're going to do better. I want those documents completed before they leave this building. Understood, sir. Elena stood carefully, steadying herself with the cane. As she moved toward the door, she paused and looked back at the SEAL team. For several seconds, she simply observed them. Her expression unreadable. Then she spoke, her voice carrying clearly across the room despite its quiet tone. "You know what the hardest part of this morning was? It wasn't the mockery. It wasn't the assumptions. It wasn't even the disrespect." She paused. The hardest part was recognizing that you're probably good operators. You wouldn't be SEALs otherwise. You've probably done things that matter, saved lives, completed missions that made a difference. The 7 men looked up at her, surprised by the direction of her words. That's what makes this so disappointing, Elena continued. You have the skills, the training, the experience to be better than this. But you let your prejudices override your judgment. You saw someone who didn't fit your expectations, and instead of being curious, instead of showing basic respect, you chose mockery. You chose easy jokes over professional courtesy. She shifted her weight, managing a visible spike of pain. Here's what I hope you learn from today. The person you dismiss might be the person who saves your life someday. The operator you mock might be the one with the critical expertise you need. The teammate you underestimate might be the one who carries you out when you're wounded. In special operations, we don't have the luxury of prejudice. We need every qualified operator we can get, regardless of what they look like or which service they come from. Kevin Park found his voice. Ma'am, how do we fix this? How do we make sure we don't make this mistake again? Elena considered the question. You start by questioning your assumptions. Every time you make a judgment about someone based on appearance, gender, age, or any other surface characteristic, you stop and ask yourself, what evidence do I actually have? Most of the time, you'll realize you have none. You're operating on bias, not intelligence. Second, she continued, you actively seek out exposure to people who don't fit your expectations. Work with Army units. Train with female operators. Learn from people whose experiences are different from yours. Familiarity breaks down stereotypes better than anything else. Third, and most important, you hold each other accountable. When you hear a teammate making assumptions or expressing prejudice, you speak up. Lieutenant Park knew this morning's behavior was wrong, but he stayed silent. That silence enables the problem to continue. If you want to be better, you have to be willing to challenge your teammates when they're wrong. Andre Washington spoke up, his voice rough. Ma'am, I've been in special operations for 20 years. I thought I knew what right looked like. Today proved I was wrong. That's a hard thing to accept. Being wrong isn't the problem, Senior Chief. Staying wrong is the problem. You can choose to learn from this, or you can choose to be bitter about it. But that choice will define the rest of your career. Elena moved toward the door, then paused one more time. For what it's worth, I don't think you're bad people. I think you're products of a culture that hasn't always valued diversity or questioned its assumptions. Changing culture is hard. It requires conscious effort over time. But it starts with moments like this, where you're forced to confront uncomfortable truths about yourselves. She left the room, her uneven footsteps fading down the hallway. The silence she left behind was profound. Marcus Dalton stared at the spot where she'd stood, feeling like he'd just been taken apart and reassembled by someone who understood human psychology better than any therapist he'd ever met. Elena hadn't yelled, hadn't expressed anger, hadn't demanded anything from them. She'd simply held up a mirror and forced them to look at their own reflections, and what they saw wasn't pretty. Commander Bryant positioned himself at the front of the room. All right, gentlemen. You heard Captain Hargrove's instructions. You have 3 tasks. Write a formal letter of apology to Chief Cross. Write a detailed self-assessment of your behavior and its underlying causes. And develop a personal action plan for professional improvement. Each document should be a minimum of 2 pages, typed, single-spaced. He pulled out his own laptop and set it on the table. I'll be here working on administrative tasks. You'll use your phones or tablets to type your documents. When you're finished, you'll email them to me for review. If they're insufficient, you'll rewrite them. Nobody leaves until all 3 documents meet standards. How do we know what meets standards? Tyler Brooks asked. You'll know because I'll tell you, Bryant replied flatly. I expect honesty, depth, and genuine reflection. Surface-level apologies and generic promises to do better won't cut it. I want to see that you actually understand what went wrong and why it matters." He sat down, opened his laptop, and began typing. Effectively dismissing them to their work, the 7 SEALs pulled out their phones and tablets. For several minutes, nobody typed anything. They just stared at blank screens, trying to figure out how to put into words the shame, regret, and uncomfortable self-awareness that was churning through their minds. Kevin Park was the first to start writing. His fingers moved slowly at first, then with increasing speed as the words began to flow. "Chief Warrant Officer Cross," he typed. "I am writing to apologize for my behavior on the morning of November 5th. I witnessed my teammates making disrespectful comments about you, and I failed to speak up or intervene. My silence enabled their behavior and made me complicit in their disrespect." Derek Chen watched Park typing and felt something crack inside his chest. The younger officer had found the courage to put words to the shame they all felt. If Park could do it, so could he. Chen began typing his own letter, his eyes burning with unshed tears. "Ma'am, this morning I called you a fake. I assumed you were playing dress-up, pretending to be something you weren't. I was wrong in every possible way. You are everything I claimed to be, but failed to demonstrate. Dedicated, professional, combat-proven. I judged you without evidence and mocked you without justification." One by one, the others began writing. Tyler Brooks, James Mitchell, Brandon Cole, each man confronting the ugliness of his own behavior and trying to find words adequate to the apology they owed. Andre Washington stared at his blank screen for the longest time. 20 years of service, 20 years of being right. 20 years of confidence in his own judgment, all of it undermined by one morning's catastrophic failure of character. Finally, he began to type. "Chief Cross, I am 38 years old. I have been a Navy SEAL for 2 decades. I have conducted operations on 4 continents. I have led teams in combat. I thought that experience gave me the right to judge others, to assess their value at a glance. This morning proved that experience without wisdom is worthless. Marcus Dalton was the last to start writing. As the team leader, his responsibility was greatest. His letter would have to acknowledge not just his own failures, but his failure to lead his team properly, to establish standards of conduct that prevented this kind of behavior. "Chief Warrant Officer Cross," he typed. "I am the officer responsible for SEAL Team 5. Everything my team does or fails to do is ultimately my responsibility. This morning, my team demonstrated behavior that was unprofessional, disrespectful, and contrary to the values of naval special warfare. As their leader, I failed to prevent it, failed to correct it, and participated in it. There is no excuse for that failure." The room filled with the quiet sound of typing. 7 men attempting to put words to lessons that some people never learn in a lifetime. That assumptions are dangerous. That prejudice is corrosive. That respect must be given before it can be earned. And that the measure of a warrior isn't found in their gender, their appearance, or their wounds. It's found in their actions, their dedication, and their willingness to serve something larger than themselves. Outside the conference room, the working group discussion continued. Senior leaders from both services debated doctrine, discussed training requirements, and planned future joint operations. Elena Cross sat among them, her injured leg elevated on a chair, her voice steady despite the pain, contributing expertise that would shape how Navy and Army Special Operations work together. For years to come, she'd moved past the morning's humiliation. She had work to do, missions to plan, operators to train. The 7 SEALs in the conference room were just beginning to understand what moving past their failures would require, and the clock kept ticking forward. Indifferent to shame, regret, or the painful process of growth that sometimes comes only after we've been forced to see ourselves as we truly are. 2 hours later, Commander Bryant looked up from his laptop screen where he'd been reviewing the submitted letters. The 7 SEALs sat exhausted, emotionally drained from the brutal process of honest self-examination. Writing those documents had required confronting truths about themselves that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. "Lieutenant Commander Dalton," Bryant said, his voice neutral, "your letter is acceptable. It demonstrates genuine reflection and accountability. However, your action plan needs work. Saying you'll be more aware is too vague. I need specific, measurable steps you'll take to address the underlying issues. Rewrite that section." Dalton nodded, pulling his tablet back out. "Senior Chief Washington," Bryant continued, "your apology letter meets standards. Your self-assessment is brutally honest, perhaps more than I expected. But I have a question. You wrote that this incident made you realize you've been coasting on reputation rather than earning respect. Explain what you meant by that." Washington looked up, his face drawn. "Sir, I've spent 20 years being the experienced guy, the one who knows better, the one who doesn't get questioned. Somewhere along the way, I stopped listening. I stopped learning. I assumed that because I'd been doing this longer than most, my judgments were automatically correct. This morning proved that assumption was garbage. And how does that realization change your behavior going forward? It means I need to shut up and listen more, sir. It means questioning my own assumptions before I vocalize them. It means remembering that experience without humility is just arrogance with a resume." Bryant held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded. "That's the kind of insight I'm looking for. Make sure your action plan reflects that understanding." He moved to the next submission. "Petty Officer Chun, your letter is too focused on excuses. You spend 2 paragraphs explaining why you made the comments you made. Chief Cross doesn't need your explanations. She needs your acknowledgement that you were wrong and your commitment to do better. Rewrite it." Chun's face flushed, but he nodded. "Aye, sir." "Petty Officer Brooks, acceptable work across all 3 documents. Your action plan is particularly strong volunteering to mentor junior personnel about professional conduct. Shows you understand that changing culture requires active effort, not just passive awareness." Brooks looked surprised. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me. Thank Chief Cross when you see her again, assuming you get that opportunity. And then follow through on what you wrote. Words without action are worthless." "Understood, sir." Bryant continued through the rest of the team. Mitchell's work was acceptable. Cole's medical perspective on his failure to intervene was particularly insightful. Park's letters demonstrated the kind of moral courage that suggested he'd learn from this mistake rather than be defined by it. "All right," Bryant said, closing his laptop. "Those of you who need rewrites, you have 30 minutes. The rest of you will sit here and think about what comes next. Because here's something you need to understand. Today was the easy part." The SEALs looked at him with confusion. "Writing letters is easy," Bryant explained. "Feeling bad about what you did is easy. Real change is hard. Real change means catching yourself in the moment when you're about to make an assumption based on prejudice. It means speaking up when your teammates do it. It means actively working to change not just your own behavior, but the culture around you. That work doesn't end today. It doesn't end next week. It's ongoing for the rest of your careers." He stood, walking to the window that overlooked the base. Late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the training grounds, where new SEAL candidates were running through obstacle courses, pushing their bodies to the limit, dreaming of earning their trident pins. "Here's what's going to happen," Bryant said, still looking out the window. "Captain Hargrove is going to make a decision about your futures. That decision will be based partly on these letters, partly on your service records, and partly on his assessment of whether you're capable of learning from this. Some of you might lose your team leadership positions. Some of you might face formal reprimands that affect your promotion potential. All of you will have this incident in your permanent files." He turned back to face them. "But here's the thing, this doesn't have to be the end of your story. It can be the beginning of a better one. I've seen operators come back from worse mistakes than this. I've seen people use incidents like this as catalysts for genuine growth. The question is whether you have the character to do that work." The door opened and Captain Hargrove entered, followed by Major Chun from Army Special Operations Command. Both men's expressions were serious. "Gentlemen," Hargrove said, "the working group session has concluded. Admiral Knowles and Colonel Rutherford have departed. Chief Cross has returned to Fort Bragg. Before she left, she asked me to convey a message to you." The SEALs straightened in their chairs, tension visible in every line of their bodies. Chief Cross said, and I quote, "Tell them I don't need their apologies to continue doing my job. But I hope they need to write them in order to do theirs better." She also said that she's willing to participate in future joint training exercises if Naval Special Warfare requests it, and that she bears no personal animosity toward any individual in this room. Hargrove paused, letting that sink in. In other words, she's already moved past this. The question is whether you can. Major Chun stepped forward. "I'm going to add something from the Army perspective. Chief Cross is one of our most valuable operators. She survived injuries that would have ended most careers. She's demonstrated professionalism under conditions that would break most people. And today, she conducted a briefing that's going to influence joint operations doctrine for years to come, all while managing significant pain and dealing with the emotional toll of being disrespected by people who should have known better." His voice hardened slightly. "If you take nothing else from today, understand this. Operators like Chief Cross are rare. They don't come along often. When you encounter them, you have two choices. You can learn from them, or you can let your prejudices blind you to their value. The first choice makes you better. The second choice makes you irrelevant." "Sir," Kevin Park said quietly, "is there any way we can apologize to Chief Cross directly? I know we submitted letters, but it feels inadequate." Hargrove exchanged glances with Major Chun. "That's not my decision to make. If Chief Cross wants to engage with you again, she'll let us know. Otherwise, you respect her space and focus on becoming the kind of operators who wouldn't make this mistake in the first place." "Understood." "Sir," Hargrove moved to the head of the table, his command presence filling the room. "Here are my decisions. Lieutenant Commander Dalton, you will retain your position as team leader, but you're on probationary status for the next 6 months. Any further incidents of poor judgment or unprofessional conduct will result in removal from command and reassignment. Clear?" "Crystal clear, sir." "Senior Chief Washington, you're being removed from the team sergeant position effective immediately. You'll be reassigned to a training instructor role at the Naval Special Warfare Center, where you can use your experience to shape the next generation of operators. Consider it an opportunity to make amends by ensuring future SEALs don't make your mistakes." Washington's face went pale, but he kept his voice steady. "Aye, sir. The rest of you will remain with Team 5. But you're all going to participate in a month-long professional development program that includes unconscious bias training, leadership ethics, and cross-service integration exercises. You'll also be assigned as mentors to junior personnel, where you'll share this experience as a cautionary tale." Hargrove's gaze swept across all 7 men. "Additionally, Team 5 is being assigned to a joint training exercise in 3 months. You'll be working directly with an Army Special Forces team on maritime operations. You will demonstrate that you've learned from today, or you will wash out of special operations entirely. There is no middle ground here." "Sir," Marcus Dalton said, "we understand. We won't let you down. You already let me down, Lieutenant Commander. Now you get a chance to rebuild trust. Don't waste it." Major Chun spoke up again. I've recommended to my command that Army Special Operations maintains an open channel with Naval Special Warfare for future cooperation. What happened today was unfortunate, but Chief Cross believes it can be a learning opportunity for both services. She's right. We're going to use this incident to improve how we prepare operators for joint operations and how we address cultural barriers that undermine mission effectiveness. He looked directly at the SEAL team. That means you're going to be case studies. Your mistakes are going to be discussed in classrooms, used in training scenarios, and analyzed by people who are trying to prevent similar incidents. Your names won't be used, but your actions will be. I suggest you make peace with that. The weight of that statement settled over the room like a physical presence. Their worst day was going to become a teaching tool, their failure dissected and examined by thousands of future operators. Tyler Brooks spoke up, his voice strained. "Sir, how does Chief Cross do it? How does she deal with this kind of disrespect and just keep going?" Major Chun's expression softened slightly. "You'd have to ask her that. But I can tell you what I've observed. She doesn't let other people's limitations define her capabilities. She doesn't wait for permission to be excellent. And she understands that proving people wrong is sometimes the best form of justice. She's also not alone," he continued. "Chief Cross has a team, a community of operators who know her value and support her. That support system matters more than the opinions of people who judge without understanding." Hargrove checked his watch. "It's 1600 hours. You're dismissed to return to your barracks. Tomorrow morning at 0600, you'll report to my office individually for one-on-one counseling sessions. Bring your revised action plans and be prepared to discuss specific steps you're taking to improve. Am I clear?" "Yes, sir." The response was unified, sharp, the automatic response of military discipline. "Good. Then get out of my sight. And gentlemen, use tonight to think about what kind of operators you want to be. Because right now, I'm not sure you know." The 7 SEALs stood, gathered their belongings, and filed out of the conference room. The hallway outside was empty, the administrative staff having left for the day. Their footsteps echoed on the polished floors as they made their way toward the exit. Nobody spoke. There was nothing to say that hadn't already been said. No words that could undo the damage or accelerate the healing. They'd made their mistakes in public, faced consequences in public. And now they had to rebuild their reputations through sustained action over time. As they stepped outside into the late afternoon heat. The base was winding down for the evening. Personnel headed toward the dining facility or the gym or their quarters. Normal military life, continuing unchanged despite the fact that 7 SEALs' worlds had been turned upside down. Marcus Dalton paused on the steps, watching the activity. "Tomorrow morning, 0530, we meet as a team before the individual counseling sessions. We're going to talk about how we move forward from this. All of us, together." The others nodded agreement. Whatever their individual failures, they were still a team. And teams survived by supporting each other. Even through the hardest times. Especially through the hardest times. As they walked toward the barracks. Andre Washington looked back at Building 1847, where the conference room light was still on. Commander Bryant was probably still in there, reviewing their letters one more time, making notes about their progress or lack thereof. And somewhere on the road between Little Creek and Fort Bragg, Alina Cross was driving home, her injured leg probably aching from the day's exertions, her mind already moving to the next mission, the next briefing, the next opportunity to prove that excellence has no gender. She'd left them behind physically, emotionally, professionally. She had better things to do than dwell on the ignorance of people who didn't matter to her mission. Question now was whether they could leave behind the men they'd been that morning and become the operators they needed to be. Answer would come not today, not tomorrow, but in the months and years ahead, in the choices they made when nobody was watching. In the culture they created for the operators who came after them. Time would tell if they were capable of that growth. Time. And the unforgiving standards of special operations, where failure to adapt is failure to survive. 3 weeks had passed since the incident at Little Creek. 3 weeks of individual counseling sessions, ethics training modules, and the uncomfortable process of confronting biases that most of the team hadn't even known they carried. The professional development program Captain Hargrove had mandated was comprehensive and unrelenting, designed not just to punish, but to fundamentally reshape how they thought about service, respect, and professionalism. Marcus Dalton sat in a sterile classroom at the Naval Special Warfare Center on a gray Wednesday morning, surrounded by 40 other special operations personnel from various units. The instructor at the front of the room was Commander Lisa Park, a Navy psychologist who specialized in organizational behavior and military culture. She'd been conducting these sessions for 5 years, and her reputation for not accepting bullshit was legendary. "Let's talk about unconscious bias," Commander Park said, advancing her presentation slide. "Who can tell me what that means?" A few hands went up. She pointed to a SEAL from Team 3. "It's prejudices we don't know we have, ma'am. Assumptions our brains make automatically based on things like gender, race, or appearance." "Correct. And here's what makes unconscious bias particularly dangerous in military settings. It affects our tactical decision-making, our assessment of personnel capabilities, and our ability to work effectively in joint or coalition environments. When you make assumptions based on bias rather than evidence, you create vulnerabilities that enemies can exploit." She clicked to the next slide, showing a tactical scenario. "Let me give you a real-world example that happened 18 months ago. A SEAL team was operating in Afghanistan, working with a female cultural support team member. During a village clearing operation, the CST operator identified a threat that the SEAL element had missed: a woman wearing a suicide vest, positioned near civilian children. The room was silent, everyone paying attention now. The CST operator called out the threat. The SEAL team leader initially dismissed her assessment because, and I'm quoting from the after-action report here, she seemed too nervous to be thinking clearly. That team leader's unconscious bias, assuming that visible nervousness meant incompetence, nearly got his entire element killed. The CST operator was nervous because she'd correctly identified a suicide bomber. Her nervousness was appropriate situational awareness, not incompetence. Commander Park let that sink in. The suicide vest detonated 30 seconds later. Because the team leader had delayed acting on the CST's warning, 2 SEALs were wounded by shrapnel. They survived, but the injuries were preventable. The team leader's bias created a tactical failure. She looked around the room. "Now I know some of you are here because of a specific incident. I'm not going to call anyone out by name, but I want you to think about how bias affects not just interpersonal relationships, but operational effectiveness. When you dismiss someone based on gender, appearance, or service branch, you're not just being disrespectful, you're making yourself less effective as an operator." Dalton felt his face burning. He knew Park was talking about them, even without using names. The classroom's eyes weren't obviously on his team, but he could feel the awareness nonetheless. The training continued for another 2 hours, covering case studies, psychological research, and practical exercises designed to help operators recognize their own biases. It was uncomfortable, enlightening, and occasionally infuriating, especially when Dalton caught himself making the exact kinds of assumptions Park was warning against. During the lunch break, Dalton found Kevin Park, no relation to the instructor, sitting alone outside the training building, eating a sandwich and staring at nothing. "You okay, Park?" The younger officer looked up. "Honestly, sir? No. This training is making me realize how many times I've stayed silent when I should have spoken up. It's not just what happened with Chief Cross. It's dozens of smaller moments over the past year, Where I heard something wrong and didn't say anything. Dalton sat down beside him. I know what you mean. I keep running through situations in my head, wondering how many times I've dismissed someone or made judgments without evidence. It's not a comfortable feeling. Commander Park said something during the break that stuck with me, Park continued. She said that the hardest part of addressing bias isn't admitting you have it, it's doing the ongoing work to counteract it. It's not a one-time fix. It's a constant process of catching yourself and correcting. Yeah, Dalton unwrapped his own sandwich but didn't eat it. I've been thinking about requesting a meeting with Chief Cross, to apologize in person, not just through a letter. But I don't know if that's appropriate, or if it's just me trying to make myself feel better. Have you asked Captain Hargrove if it's possible? Not yet. I'm not sure if reaching out would be respectful of her space, or if it would be forcing her to relive something she's moved past. Park considered this. Maybe the question isn't what would make you feel better, but what would serve her. Does she need your apology, or does she need you to do better going forward? Dalton looked at the younger officer with new appreciation. When did you get so wise? I'm not wise, sir. I'm just trying to think before I act for once. That afternoon, the training shifted to a different building where they participated in cross-service integration exercises. Army Special Forces, Navy SEALs, Air Force combat controllers, and Marine Raiders all mixed together for scenario-based training designed to break down service rivalries and build mutual respect. The scenario was straightforward. A joint team had to plan and execute a simulated hostage rescue in an urban environment. Each service brought different capabilities and perspectives. Success required listening to each other, integrating different approaches, and checking egos at the door. Dalton found himself paired with an Army Special Forces captain named Sarah Mitchell. She was compact, muscular, and carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing to prove. As they reviewed the mission brief together, Dalton caught himself making an assumption that she'd want to focus on the planning phase rather than the assault phase. He stopped himself. That was exactly the kind of bias Commander Park had been talking about. He had no evidence that Captain Mitchell preferred planning to assaulting. He was making an assumption based on gender. Captain Mitchell, he said carefully, what's your assessment of the tactical approach? She studied the map. Direct assault is risky given the civilian presence and multi-story structure. I'd recommend a two-element approach. One element creates a distraction at the front while the second element breaches from above via helicopter fast rope. We secure the hostages, establish a defensive perimeter, and extract via rooftop. It was a sound tactical plan, aggressive but calculated. Exactly the kind of approach Dalton would have suggested. I agree, he said. What's your experience with helicopter insertions in urban environments? 4 operations in Syria, 2 in Iraq, 1 in Yemen. I've done it enough to know what works and what doesn't. The key is timing the distraction element perfectly so the breach team isn't exposed during the most vulnerable phase. They spent the next hour planning the operation in detail. Mitchell's expertise was evident in every suggestion she made. She caught potential problems Dalton had missed, offered creative solutions to tactical challenges, and demonstrated the kind of operational thinking that only came from real-world experience. When the simulation began, their joint team executed flawlessly. The distraction worked, the breach was clean, the hostages were secured, and they extracted without simulated casualties. It was a textbook operation. Afterward, as they conducted the after-action review, the instructor, a Marine colonel with 30 years of experience, singled out their team for praise. This is what right looks like, people. Captain Mitchell and Lieutenant Commander Dalton didn't waste time establishing who was in charge or whose service had the better approach. They assessed the problem, combined their expertise, and executed professionally. That's how joint operations are supposed to work. As they left the training facility, Dalton caught up with Mitchell. "Thank you for that. Your tactical plan was excellent, and you made me a better operator today." Mitchell gave him a measured look. "You're one of the Team 5 guys, aren't you? The ones who screwed up with Chief Cross?" Dalton's stomach sank. "Yes, ma'am. That was us. I know Elena, deployed with her in 2023. She's one of the best operators I've ever worked with, male or female. What you guys did to her was unprofessional. You're absolutely right. We're trying to do better." Mitchell studied him for a long moment. "Trying is a start. Following through is what matters. Elena doesn't need your apologies. She needs you to be better to the next female operator you encounter. And the one after that. And the one after that. That's how you make amends, by changing the culture that enabled your mistake in the first place. Understood?" "I hope so, Lieutenant Commander. Because there are more women coming through the pipeline. Women who are qualified, dedicated, and capable. If the SEAL community can't accept them as equals, that's the SEAL's loss, not theirs." She walked away, leaving Dalton standing alone in the parking lot as the sun set over the training facilities. That evening, back in the barracks, Team 5 gathered in the common room for their nightly debrief, a practice they'd started after the incident. Every evening, they discussed what they'd learned, what challenged them, and how they were progressing. "I worked with an Army SEF captain today," Dalton began. "She was exceptional. And I caught myself making assumptions about her capabilities before she'd done anything. It was exactly what Commander Park warned us about." Brandon Cole nodded. "I had a similar experience. The instructor teaching the medical module was a female Air Force pararescue specialist. Before she even started teaching, I assumed she'd be less experienced than the male PJs I've trained with. Then she demonstrated techniques I'd never seen before, shared lessons from operations I'd never heard about, and made me realize how limited my perspective has been." "I'm starting to understand something," Derek Chun said quietly. "It's not that we were uniquely terrible people. It's that we were operating in a culture that reinforced our biases instead of challenging them. Every joke, every dismissive comment, every time we stayed silent when someone said something wrong, we were building a culture that made what happened with Chief Cross almost inevitable." Tyler Brooks added, "The question is how we break that culture. How do we create an environment where the next Chief Cross who comes through gets respect from day one, instead of having to prove herself over and over?" "We start by being the teammates we should have been from the beginning," Kevin Park said. "We speak up when we hear something wrong. We question our own assumptions. We actively seek out opportunities to work with people who don't fit the traditional mold. We mentor junior operators to do better than we did." James Mitchell, who'd been quiet most of the evening, finally spoke. "I called my daughter today. She's 17, thinking about military service. I told her what happened with Chief Cross, not because I'm proud of it, but because I wanted her to know that I'm trying to be better. That I want to be the kind of father and the kind of operator who makes the military better for people like her." The room fell silent. Mitchell rarely talked about his family, preferring to keep his personal life separate from his professional identity. The fact that he was sharing this meant something. "What did she say?" Dalton asked. "She asked if I'd learned anything. I told her I'm learning. She said that was good, because she's going to hold me accountable." Mitchell smiled slightly. 17 years old and already tougher than me. Andre Washington, who'd been sitting quietly in the corner, stood up. "I've been removed from Team Sergeant. I'm being reassigned to the training center. Part of me is angry about that one mistake is costing me a position, one earned through 20 years of service." He paused, his expression troubled. "But the other part of me knows it's the right call. I wasn't leading properly. I was reinforcing toxic behaviors instead of challenging them. Maybe at the training center, I can help create a generation of SEALs who don't make my mistakes. Maybe that's more important than protecting my ego." Dalton stood and extended his hand. "For what it's worth, Senior Chief, I think you're going to be an excellent instructor. Because you're willing to be honest about your failures. That's the kind of teaching the next generation needs." Washington shook his hand. "Just make sure Team 5 does better without me than they did with me. That'll be the real measure of whether I screwed up as badly as I think I did." As the meeting broke up and the team headed to their quarters, Dalton remained in the common room, staring at his phone. He opened his email and began typing. "Captain Hargrove, I would like to request guidance on the appropriate protocol for attempting direct communication with Chief Warrant Officer Cross. My team and I have completed our written apologies, but I'm uncertain whether attempting further contact would be appropriate or welcome. I don't want to impose on her time or force her to relive an uncomfortable situation. However, if there's a way to offer a more meaningful apology or to support her mission going forward, I would like to explore that possibility. Respectfully, LCDR Marcus Dalton." He read it 3 times, then hit send before he could second-guess himself. The response came faster than expected, just 20 minutes later. "Lieutenant Commander Dalton, your concern for appropriateness is noted and appreciated. Chief Cross has indicated that she's willing to participate in the joint training exercise scheduled for 2 months from now. That will be your opportunity to demonstrate professional growth through actions rather than words. Focus on being better operators. That's the apology she needs. VR Captain Hargrove." Dalton read the message twice, then forwarded it to his team with a simple note. 2 months. Let's make sure we're ready. 2 months to prove they'd learned something. 2 months to transform from the operators who'd failed so spectacularly into the professionals they should have been all along. 2 months until they'd face Chief Warrant Officer Elena Cross again, not as the woman they'd mocked, but as the operator they needed to learn from. The clock was ticking, and this time they intended to get it right. 8 weeks later, SEAL Team 5 stood on the deck of a modified patrol boat in the waters off the North Carolina coast, watching the sunrise paint the Atlantic in shades of amber and gold. The joint training exercise, officially designated Operation Tidewater Shield, had begun at 0400 hours with a pre-mission brief that laid out the scenario. A combined Navy-Army element would conduct a simulated maritime interdiction followed by a land-based hostage rescue in a denied urban environment. The scenario was complex by design, requiring seamless integration between SEAL maritime capabilities and Army Special Operations ground expertise. Success would require trust, communication, and the ability to set aside service rivalries in favor of mission accomplishment. Marcus Dalton checked his gear for the 3rd time, a nervous habit he developed over 8 weeks of intensive training and self-examination. His team had spent those weeks not just in mandatory professional development courses, but in voluntary additional training working with female operators from other units, studying case studies of successful joint operations, and consciously practicing the behaviors they'd failed to demonstrate during their first encounter with Chief Cross. "Element leaders, this is command. Radio check, over." The voice came through Dalton's headset, clear and authoritative. "SEAL element." "Good copy," Dalton responded. "Army element." "Good copy." The second voice was female, calm, and instantly recognizable despite the electronic distortion of the radio. "Elena Cross." Dalton's heart rate spiked, and he forced himself to breathe slowly, deliberately. This was it. Their chance to demonstrate that the past 8 weeks had meant something, that they'd grown beyond the operators who'd failed so spectacularly at Little Creek. The patrol boat's engines throttled down as they approached the designated position. Through his night vision goggles, Dalton could see the target vessel, a commercial fishing boat that intelligence indicated was being used to smuggle weapons and personnel. The scenario called for the SEAL element to board and secure the vessel, then coordinate with the Army element for follow-on operations against land-based targets. SEAL element, you are cleared hot. Execute, execute, execute. Dalton signaled his team. They moved with practiced efficiency, their rigid hull inflatable boat sliding away from the patrol craft and racing toward the target vessel. The approach was textbook quiet, fast. Exploiting the pre-dawn darkness to achieve surprise. Brandon Cole was the first to the ladder, his movements economical despite the weight of his medical gear. He'd spent the past 8 weeks becoming certified in advanced tactical medicine, driven by a need to ensure he'd never again see someone in distress and fail to help. Behind him came Tyler Brooks and Derek Chen, their weapons up and ready, covering angles with precision born of thousands of hours of training. Kevin Park followed, then James Mitchell. Dalton brought up the rear, his eyes scanning for threats, his mind processing the tactical picture. They flowed onto the deck of the fishing vessel like water, clearing spaces with speed and efficiency. SEAL element to command, vessel secure. 5 enemy personnel detained, no resistance. Continuing search for intelligence materials. Command copies. Stand by for Army element coordination. In the vessel's bridge, Derek Chun found a waterproof case containing documents and a laptop simulated intelligence that would provide targeting information for the follow-on mission. He photographed everything with his tactical camera, then prepared the materials for transfer to the Army element. SEAL element, this is Army element actual. Alina Cross's voice came through the radio. We've established overwatch position on the coast. Send your intel package via encrypted data burst, then prepare for coordinated movement to the primary objective. Roger, Army element. Transmitting now. Chun connected his camera to the encrypted communication system and uploaded the intelligence package. Within seconds, the data was being analyzed by the Army team positioned 3 kilometers inland. SEAL element, we've identified the primary target location based on your intel. Coordinates being sent to your nav system now. Recommend you establish blocking position at grid. November Bravo 472 while our element approaches from the north. Target building has multiple exits. We need containment. Dalton studied the map on his tactical display. The blocking position made tactical sense. It would prevent enemy escape while allowing the Army element to utilize their expertise in building assault operations. It was exactly the kind of integrated planning that successful joint operations required. Army element, SEAL element concurs. Moving to blocking position now. ETA 12 minutes. Copy. Army element will initiate assault at Hay Hour Plus. 25. Maintain radio discipline and be prepared for squirters trying to exit. Through your position. The SEAL team moved from the vessel to their inflatable boat and headed toward shore. The beach insertion was unopposed, and they quickly moved inland through the simulated urban environment, training facility that replicated the complexity of real-world operational areas. As they established their blocking position, Dalton couldn't help but notice the professionalism of the coordination. Alina Cross was running her element with the same calm competence she demonstrated during her briefing 8 weeks ago. There was no ego, no service rivalry, just clear tactical communication focused on mission success. All elements, this is command. Echower in 60 seconds. SEAL element, confirm your position. SEAL element set at blocking position, ready. Army element, confirm your position. Army element is staged for assault. Breaching team ready, security element in position, command element prepared for entry on breach. Dalton watched his team members settle into their positions. They'd rehearsed this dozens of times over the past weeks, but this time felt different. This time they were proving something not to their instructors or their commanders, but to themselves. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Execute, Execute, execute. The sound of the explosive breach carried across the training area, a sharp crack followed by the controlled chaos of entry. Through his headset, Dalton could hear Elena coordinating her team with precision. Breach successful, moving to hostage location. Contact front. 2 enemy combatants neutralized. Proceeding to second floor. Hostile attempting to flee via south exit SEAL element. You should have a squirter heading your way. SEAL element copies. We see him. A role player emerged from the target building, running directly toward the SEAL position. Tyler Brooks and Derek Chun moved to intercept, executing a textbook detention that would have made their instructors proud. The role player was secured within seconds, processed according to proper procedures, and held for intelligence exploitation. Army element. SEAL element has 1 enemy combatant detained at blocking position. Roger, SEAL element. We have secured all hostages and cleared the structure. Preparing for exfiltration. Send 2 personnel to assist with casualty evacuation. We have 1 simulated friendly casualty requiring immediate medical attention. Brandon Cole was moving before Dalton could issue the order. I'm going. Mitchell, you're with me. They approached the target building carefully, maintaining security protocols even though the scenario was controlled. Elena Cross met them at the entrance. Her walking cane conspicuously absent. Her physical therapy had clearly progressed significantly since their last encounter. She looked at Cole with an expression that was professionally neutral. We have a simulated gunshot wound to the chest. Tension pneumothorax. Patient is unconscious. You're the closest qualified medic. What's your treatment protocol? Cole's medical training kicked in automatically. Needle decompression, second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. Establish airway, high-flow oxygen, prepare for surgical airway if needed. Dress the wound, establish 4 access for fluid resuscitation, and prepare for immediate evacuation. Elena nodded. Correct. Execute. For the next 5 minutes, Cole worked on the simulated casualty with the kind of focused intensity that demonstrated just how seriously he'd taken his additional medical training. Elena watched without interfering, occasionally asking questions that tested his knowledge and decision-making under pressure. When the casualty was stabilized and ready for simulated evacuation, Elena keyed her radio. Command, this is Army Element. All objectives secure, hostages recovered, intelligence materials obtained, 1 wounded friendly stabilized and ready for evacuation. Mission successful. Command copies. All elements begin exfiltration procedures. After action review will be conducted at 0900 hours. As the exercise wound down and role players broke character, the 2 teams came together at the extraction point. It was the first time Elena had been face-to-face with the SEAL Team 5 members since that morning at Little Creek. And the tension was palpable. She looked at each of them in turn, her expression revealing nothing. Then she spoke, her voice carrying clearly despite the early morning wind. That was professional work. Your coordination was solid, your tactical decisions were sound, and your execution was clean. The blocking position was effective, the casualty treatment was textbook, and your communications discipline was exactly what joint operations require. She paused. I have no complaints about your performance today. Dalton stepped forward. Ma'am, we owe you an apology that goes beyond the letters we wrote. What we did at Little Creek was unprofessional, disrespectful, and inexcusable. We've spent the past 8 weeks trying to become better operators, but more importantly, trying to become better people. We know that doesn't undo the harm we caused, but we hope it demonstrates that we took your words seriously. Elena studied him for a long moment. Lieutenant Commander, I don't need you to apologize again. I need you to do exactly what you did today. Treat every operator with professional respect, regardless of their gender, service, or appearance. I need you to hold your teammates accountable when they fall short of that standard. And I need you to mentor the next generation to be better than you were 8 weeks ago. Understood, ma'am? That's exactly what we intend to do. She turned to Brandon Cole. Your medical treatment was excellent. I understand you've been pursuing additional certifications. Cole nodded. Yes, ma'am. Advanced tactical medicine, prolonged field care, and I'm working toward my combat paramedic certification. After what happened at Little Creek, I realized I needed to be better, not just at recognizing injuries, but at acting on that knowledge regardless of social pressure. That's good. We need medics who have the moral courage to prioritize patient care over peer acceptance. Don't lose that. Alina shifted her attention to Kevin Park. Lieutenant Park, I read your letter. You wrote that you knew the behavior was wrong, but stayed silent. That honesty was appreciated. What have you done since then to ensure you don't stay silent again? Park straightened. Ma'am, I've made it a personal policy to speak up every time I see or hear something that doesn't meet professional standards. It's made me unpopular in some circles, but I'd rather be unpopular than complicit. I've also volunteered to mentor junior officers about the importance of moral courage in leadership. Good. The teams need officers who will challenge toxic behavior, not enable it. She looked at the rest of the team, Chun. Brooks, Mitchell, and gave a slight nod of acknowledgement. Then she turned to Andre Washington, who'd been standing slightly apart from the group. Senior Chief Washington, I heard about your reassignment. How are you adapting to the instructor role? Washington stepped forward, his bearing still proud despite the visible cost of his mistake. Ma'am, it's been humbling, but I think it's where I need to be. I've been incorporating lessons from our failure into my instruction, teaching new SEALs about professional conduct, unconscious bias, and the importance of respecting all operators, regardless of appearance or background. It's the least I can do to prevent future incidents. That's valuable work. The culture changes one generation at a time. Make sure the next generation is better than ours. That's my goal, ma'am. A Marine officer approached Major Daniel Foster, the exercise controller. Chief Cross, outstanding leadership today. Your team's performance was textbook, and your coordination with the SEAL element was exemplary. This is exactly the kind of joint operations capability we're trying to develop across the special operations community. Elena accepted the praise with a slight nod. Thank you, sir. But the credit belongs to both teams. Lieutenant Commander Dalton and his personnel demonstrated excellent tactical flexibility and professional integration. That's what made the mission successful. Foster smiled. Noted. All right, everyone. We've got transportation waiting to take you back to the debrief location. Get your gear squared away and be ready for the after-action review in 90 minutes. I want to capture these lessons while they're fresh. As the teams moved toward the waiting vehicles, Alina fell into step beside Dalton. For several paces, neither spoke. Then she said quietly, "You asked Captain Hargrove about contacting me directly, about apologizing in person." Dalton glanced at her, surprised. "Yes, ma'am. He told me to focus on being better operators. That was the right guidance. Words are easy. Actions matter. Today's actions were good. Keep doing that, and we're square." "That's generous of you, ma'am." "It's not generosity. It's practicality. I can't change the past, and I don't have energy to waste on grudges. What I can do is hold people accountable for their future behavior and recognize growth when I see it." She adjusted her gear bag. "You and your team showed growth today. That's worth acknowledging." They reached the vehicles. As Alina prepared to board the one designated for Army personnel, she turned back one more time. "Lieutenant Commander Dalton, one more thing. The female SEAL candidates currently in training, they're going to face the same assumptions and prejudices I've faced. Some of them will make it through. When they do, they'll need teammates who see them as operators first. Be those teammates. We will, ma'am. You have my word. Elena climbed into the vehicle without another word. As it pulled away, Dalton stood watching until it disappeared from view. Kevin Park approached from behind. That went better than I expected, sir. She's a better person than we deserved, Park. A lot better. Yes, sir. So now what? Dalton turned to face his team, all of them watching him with expressions that mixed relief, renewed purpose, and the quiet determination of people who'd stared at their own failures and chosen to grow beyond them. Now we live up to the standard she set. We become the operators and the people who make sure nobody else has to endure what she did. We change the culture, one interaction at a time. And if we screw up again? Tyler Brooks asked. Then we own it immediately, correct it completely, and learn from it permanently. That's all anyone can do. The sun had fully risen now, burning off the morning mist and illuminating the training facility in harsh, unforgiving light. But in that light, SEAL Team 5 stood a little straighter, their shadows a little less heavy, their purpose a little more clear. They'd fallen. They'd been broken. And now, slowly, painfully, they were becoming something better. The journey wasn't over. It might never be over. But for the first time since that morning at Little Creek, they believed they were moving in the right direction. And sometimes, that belief is where redemption begins. The after-action review began promptly at 0900 hours, in a large briefing room at Camp Leoing. The space was filled with personnel from multiple services, SEALs, Army Special Forces, Marine Raiders, Air Force Combat Controllers, and senior officers from various Special Operations Commands. Major Daniel Foster stood at the front beside a large screen, displaying tactical maps and performance metrics from the exercise. Ladies and gentlemen, Operation Tidewater Shield has concluded successfully, Foster began. All primary objectives were achieved, simulated casualties were minimized, and inter-service coordination exceeded expectations. This exercise demonstrates that when we set aside service rivalries and focus on mission accomplishment, we can achieve results that neither service could accomplish alone. He clicked to the next slide showing a timeline of the operation. Let's walk through the execution phase by phase, identifying what worked well and what needs improvement. Chief Warrant Officer Cross, would you start us off with the Army element's perspective? Elena stood, moving to the front without her cane, a detail that several people noticed with quiet approval. She'd clearly pushed herself hard in physical therapy over the past weeks, and the results were evident. The maritime intelligence package provided by the SEAL element was critical to our success, Elena began, her voice carrying the same professional authority as her briefing at Little Creek. The photographs and documents recovered from the vessel gave us exact target location, enemy strength, and hostage position. Without that intelligence, we would have been operating blind in the urban environment. She advanced to a slide showing communication logs. The SEAL element's response time to our request for blocking position was excellent. 12 minutes from beach insertion to tactical position. That rapid deployment prevented potential enemy escape routes and contained the objective area effectively. Major Foster interjected, and the coordination between elements during the assault phase? Seamless, Elena replied. Lieutenant Commander Dalton's team maintained strict radio discipline, provided real-time updates on enemy movement toward their position, and successfully detained one high-value target attempting to escape. Their situational awareness enhanced our operational effectiveness. She looked directly at the SEAL Team 5 members. I'd also note that Petty Officer Cole's medical response was outstanding. He arrived at the casualty location within 2 minutes of our call, correctly diagnosed a tension pneumothorax, and executed appropriate treatment protocol without hesitation. That kind of medical capability is exactly what joint operations require. Qualified personnel who can support wounded operators regardless of service affiliation. Brandon Cole sat straighter in his chair, accepting the recognition with visible humility. The acknowledgement from Alina carried weight that no amount of instructor praise could match. This was validation from someone who'd operated in real combat, who'd treated actual casualties under fire, whose opinion was forged in experience rather than theory. Chief Cross, any areas for improvement from your perspective? Foster asked. Elena considered. One challenge was the slight difference in radio protocols between services. We use different brevity codes for certain situations, which caused a 3-second delay when calling for the blocking position. That's a minor issue, but in real-world operations, 3 seconds can matter. I'd recommend developing unified brevity codes for joint operations. Foster made a note. Excellent observation. Lieutenant Commander Dalton, the SEAL perspective. Dalton stood and moved forward. Sir, from our viewpoint, the Army element's tactical flexibility was impressive. When we transmitted the intelligence package, they were able to analyze it, develop an assault plan, and coordinate with our blocking position in under 13 minutes. That's faster than many single-service operations I've participated in. He clicked to a different slide showing the urban assault layout. Chief Cross's decision to utilize our element for containment rather than assault was tactically sound. The Army has more experience with building clearance in complex urban environments. Rather than duplicating capabilities, she leveraged our maritime insertion expertise and their ground assault proficiency. That's exactly how joint operations should function. Any challenges from the SEAL perspective? Foster pressed. The same radio protocol issue Chief Cross mentioned, Dalton acknowledged. Also, we had a brief moment of uncertainty about casualty evacuation procedures, whether we should wait for Army, medical personnel, or move immediately to assist. In future training, clearer SOPs about cross-service medical support would be beneficial. Commander Robert Bryant, who'd been observing from the side of the room, spoke up. I'd like to highlight something that might not be obvious from the tactical performance metrics. 8 weeks ago, some personnel in this room demonstrated significant failures in professional conduct and inter-service respect. The fact that today's operation was successful speaks to their commitment to growth and to Chief Cross's willingness to give them an opportunity to demonstrate that growth. The room went quiet. Everyone knew what Bryant was referring to, even if the specific details hadn't been widely disseminated. Personal growth and professional development are just as important as tactical proficiency, Bryant continued. An operator who can execute perfect room clearing but can't work respectfully with coalition partners is a liability, not an asset. Today demonstrated that with proper training, honest self-examination, and commitment to change, operators can overcome their biases and become more effective professionals. Admiral Patricia Knowles, who'd been sitting in the back row, stood. Commander Bryant is absolutely right. I've reviewed the incident reports, the training records, and the performance evaluations from this exercise. What I see is a clear example of how accountability in education can transform a negative incident into a positive learning opportunity. She moved to the front of the room, her flag officer presence commanding immediate attention. Let me be clear about something. The special operations community cannot afford prejudice, bias, or unprofessional conduct. Our missions are too important, our enemies too dangerous, and our resources too limited. We need every qualified operator, regardless of gender, race, service branch, or any other characteristic that has nothing to do with their ability to complete the mission. Her gaze swept across the room. Chief Warrant Officer Cross represents the kind of operator we need more of: highly skilled, operationally experienced, professionally competent, and willing to work across service boundaries. The fact that some personnel initially failed to recognize her value says more about their limitations than hers. Elena shifted uncomfortably. clearly not enjoying being the center of attention. But the Admiral wasn't finished. What impresses me about Chief Cross isn't just her operational excellence. It's her grace in handling disrespect, her willingness to participate in this training exercise, despite the uncomfortable circumstances, and her focus on mission accomplishment over personal grievances. That's the kind of character we should all aspire to demonstrate. Knowles turned to face SEAL Team 5 directly. And what impresses me about Lieutenant Commander Dalton's team is their willingness to acknowledge their failure, undergo difficult training, examine their own biases, and put in the work to become better. That takes a different kind of courage than physical bravery in combat. That takes moral courage. The willingness to admit you were wrong and commit to being better. She paused. Not everyone has that courage. Some people make mistakes and spend the rest of their careers making excuses or blaming others. The fact that you chose a different path, the harder path, speaks well of your character. Don't lose that momentum. Keep growing, keep learning, keep challenging yourselves to be better. Colonel James Rutherford from Army Special Operations Command stood next. I'd like to add something from the Army perspective. We've been watching the Navy's integration of women into SEAL training with great interest. The Army opened all combat roles to women in 2016. And we've learned a lot about what works and what doesn't. One critical lesson: integration fails when it's treated as a diversity initiative, rather than an operational capability enhancement. He moved to stand beside Elena. Chief Cross isn't valuable because she's a woman in special operations. She's valuable because she's an exceptional operator who brings skills, experience, and perspective that enhance our overall capability. Her gender is simply irrelevant to her professional value. The sooner all services internalize that reality, the more effective we'll become. Rutherford looked at the assembled operators. Some of you are skeptical about women in combat roles. I understand that skepticism. It's born from years of operating in a male-dominated field where physical strength was often the primary metric of capability. But modern special operations requires more than physical strength. It requires intelligence, adaptability, cultural awareness, language skills, emotional intelligence, and tactical creativity. Women bring those capabilities just as effectively as men. He gestured toward Elena. Chief Cross has operated in environments where male operators couldn't effectively engage with local populations. She's gathered intelligence that male-only teams would have missed. She's saved lives through her medical expertise. And she's demonstrated tactical proficiency that equals or exceeds many male operators with similar experience levels. That's not diversity rhetoric. That's operational fact. Major Foster reclaimed the floor. All right, let's continue with the tactical review. I want to discuss the intelligence exploitation phase and how both elements coordinated to process materials recovered from the vessel. The briefing continued for another 90 minutes, dissecting every phase of the operation, identifying lessons learned, and developing recommendations for future joint training. Throughout the discussion, Elena and Dalton continued to demonstrate the professional cooperation that had made the mission successful, offering complementary perspectives, acknowledging each other's expertise, and focusing entirely on operational effectiveness rather than service rivalry or personal history. When the formal briefing concluded, personnel began filing out of the room. Elena was gathering her materials when Derek Chun approached hesitantly. "Ma'am, could I speak with you for a moment?" She looked up. "Of course, Petty Officer Chun." Chun struggled to find words. "Ma'am, I was one of the people who made the worst comments that morning at Little Creek. I called you a fake. I mocked your injuries. I was cruel for no reason except my own ignorance and arrogance. I remember. I just wanted you to know that I've been thinking about that morning every day since. About how wrong I was, how much damage my words caused, how my behavior reflected poorly not just on me but on the entire SEAL community. His voice was thick with emotion. I can't undo what I said, but I can promise that I'll spend the rest of my career making sure no one else has to endure what you did. That I'll speak up when I hear disrespect, that I'll challenge assumptions, that I'll be better. Elena studied him for a long moment. Petty Officer Chun, do you know what the hardest part of being a female operator is? It's not the physical challenges or the difficult training. It's knowing that no matter how well you perform, some people will always see your gender before they see your capabilities. You'll always have to prove yourself in ways your male teammates never do. Chun nodded, his expression pained. But here's what I've learned, Elena continued. Some people will never get past their biases. And that's their problem, not mine. What matters are the people who are willing to learn, willing to grow, willing to see operators as individuals rather than stereotypes. You've done that work. You've examined your biases and committed to change. That's more than many people ever do. She extended her hand. So here's what I need from you, Petty Officer Chun. I need you to be the teammate to female operators that you should have been to me. I need you to mentor junior personnel about respect and professionalism. I need you to challenge toxic behavior when you see it, even when it's uncomfortable. Can you do that? Chun shook her hand, his grip firm. Yes, ma'am. You have my word. Then we're good. Focus forward, not backward. As Chun walked away, clearly emotional but also visibly lighter, Kevin Park approached. Ma'am, I just wanted to say thank you. For what, Lieutenant? For giving us a chance to be better. A lot of people in your position would have written us off completely, and they would have been justified in doing so. The fact that you were willing to work with us today, to treat us professionally despite what happened, that's grace we didn't deserve. Elena smiled slightly. Lieutenant Park, I learned something during my recovery from injuries. Holding on to anger and resentment takes energy I need for my mission, my team, and my own healing. Forgiveness isn't about excusing bad behavior. It's about refusing to let that behavior consume your life. You and your team screwed up. You acknowledged it, learned from it, and demonstrated growth. That's all anyone can ask. Still, thank you, ma'am. As the room emptied, Elena found herself alone with Admiral Knowles. The senior officer approached with a warm smile. Chief Cross, a word before you head back to Bragg? Of course, ma'am. Knowles gestured to 2 chairs away from the main group. They sat, and for a moment, the Admiral simply looked at her with an expression that was part professional assessment, part maternal concern. How are you really doing, Elena? And I mean beyond the physical therapy progress and the operational performance. How are you handling everything, the injuries, the recovery, the incident at Little Creek, the pressure of being one of the first women in your position? Elena considered the question carefully. Honestly, ma'am, some days are harder than others. The physical pain is manageable, but the psychological weight of constantly proving myself can be exhausting. Knowing that every mistake I make will be magnified, that every success will be questioned, that I'm representing not just myself but all the women who come after me, that's a heavy burden. I know, Knowles said quietly. I carried that burden for 30 years. Every mistake as a junior officer was scrutinized as evidence that women couldn't lead. Every success was dismissed as the result of lowered standards or special treatment. It's exhausting, and it's unfair, and it shouldn't be necessary. But it is necessary, Elena said, because the culture won't change on its own. It requires people willing to endure the unfairness, to prove the doubters wrong, to create a path for the next generation. I can handle it because I know it matters. Knowles reached over and squeezed her hand. You're handling it beautifully. And for what it's worth, you have allies throughout the special operations community, people who see your value and want to support your success. You're not alone in this fight. That means a lot, ma'am. More than you know. "One more thing," Knowles said. "I'm recommending you for a joint service commendation. Based on your performance in this exercise and your professionalism in handling a difficult situation, you've demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership and character that Special Operations needs." Elena's eyes widened. "Ma'am, that's not necessary. I was just doing my job, which is exactly why you deserve recognition. The best operators never seek accolades. They just execute their mission with excellence and integrity. You've done that consistently, and it should be acknowledged." As they stood to leave, Admiral Knowles offered one final thought. "Chief Cross, there will be more incidents like Little Creek. There will be more operators who doubt you, more people who question your capabilities, more situations where you have to prove yourself all over again. That's the unfortunate reality. But remember this, you're not just fighting for yourself. You're fighting for every female operator who comes after you. And that's a mission worth completing." Elena stood at attention. "Ma'am, I'll complete that mission. You have my word." "I know you will, Chief. I know you will." As Elena left the building and headed toward her vehicle for the long drive back to Fort Bragg, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Not just satisfaction with a successful mission, but genuine hope for the future. The weight she carried hadn't disappeared, but it felt a little lighter, shared now by allies who understood the fight and were willing to join it. Behind her, SEAL Team 5 was conducting their own team debrief, discussing not just the tactical lessons but the personal ones. They were different operators than they'd been 8 weeks ago, humbler, more aware, more committed to being teammates worthy of the community they served. The sun was high overhead now, burning away the last remnants of morning mist. And in that clear light, both Elena and the team that had wronged her were moving forward not as adversaries, but as professionals committed to a shared mission. The journey toward cultural change was long and difficult, but today had proven it was possible. And sometimes, that's enough to keep going. 6 months had passed since Operation Tidewater Shield. 6 months of continued training, operational deployments, and the ongoing work of cultural transformation that doesn't happen in dramatic moments, but in the daily choices operators make when nobody's watching. SEAL Team 5 had deployed to the Mediterranean, conducted successful operations in classified locations, and returned to Little Creek with a service record that reflected their renewed commitment to professional excellence. On a crisp Tuesday morning in April, Marcus Dalton found himself standing in Captain Hargrove's office, uncertain why he'd been summoned. The captain's expression was unreadable as he gestured to a chair. "Lieutenant Commander Dalton, I'll get straight to the point. I've received a request from Army Special Operations Command. They're standing up a new Joint Maritime Task Force, a permanent unit composed of Navy, SEALs and Army Special Forces operators, designed to conduct specialized operations in denied littoral environments. They've asked for SEAL personnel to fill key positions in this task force." Dalton waited, sensing there was more. "They've specifically requested you and your team," Hargrove continued. "Chief Warrant Officer Cross is going to be the task force operations officer. She personally recommended your team for the SEAL component, based on your performance during Tidewater Shield and your demonstrated growth over the past months." The words hit Dalton like a physical impact. "Sir, Chief Cross recommended us? After everything that happened?" "After everything that happened," Hargrove confirmed. Her exact words were, "They made a significant mistake, took full responsibility, did the hard work of genuine change, and demonstrated during joint operations that they can set aside ego in favor of mission accomplishment. That's exactly what this task force needs." Dalton sat back, processing this information. "What's the assignment duration?" 18 months minimum, possibly extending to 36 months, depending on operational requirements. The task force will be based out of Naval Station Norfolk, but will deploy frequently. It's a high-profile assignment with significant career implications, both positive if it succeeds and negative if it fails. This is experimental, combining two service cultures into a single operational unit. It will be difficult. I understand, sir. Do you? Hargrove leaned forward. This isn't just about tactical operations. You'll be working daily with Chief Cross, taking orders from her, coordinating with her on strategic decisions. After what happened 6 months ago, that could be uncomfortable for everyone involved. Are you and your team prepared for that? Dalton didn't hesitate. Sir, working with Chief Cross would be an honor. She's demonstrated more professionalism, tactical expertise, and leadership capacity than most operators I've encountered in 12 years of service. If she's willing to work with us after what we did, then we need to prove every day that her trust isn't misplaced. Hargrove studied him for a long moment. That's the answer I was hoping for. I'm approving your team's transfer to the Joint Task Force. You'll report to Norfolk in 3 weeks. Use that time to prepare your personnel, arrange personal affairs, and mentally transition to a very different operational environment. Aye, sir. Thank you for the opportunity. Don't thank me. Thank Chief Cross. She's the one who believes you've earned a second chance. 3 weeks later, SEAL Team 5 arrived at a secure compound within Naval Station Norfolk. The facility was newly constructed, designed specifically to house the Joint Task Force with equal accommodation for both Navy and Army personnel. The symbolism wasn't subtle. This wasn't a Navy facility with Army guests or vice versa. It was genuinely joint from the ground up. Elena Cross was waiting in the briefing room when Dalton and his team entered for their initial orientation. She'd cut her hair shorter since they'd last seen her, and she moved without any visible limp, her physical recovery apparently complete. She wore an Army combat uniform with her rank insignia and unit patch, and she carried herself with the same quiet authority they remembered. Lieutenant Commander Dalton. Gentlemen, welcome to Joint Maritime Task Force Poseidon. I'm Chief Warrant Officer Cross, the Task Force Operations Officer. Over the next 18 months, we'll be conducting operations that require seamless integration of Navy maritime capabilities and Army ground combat expertise. Success will require trust, communication, and the ability to function as one team rather than two services sharing space. She clicked to a slide showing the task force organizational structure. The task force commander is Navy Captain Michael Torres. I report to him as the operations officer, responsible for planning and executing all tactical operations. You'll report to me for operational matters and to Commander Bryant for administrative matters. Clear, the team nodded. Good. Let me be direct about something. I recommended you for this assignment not because I've forgotten what happened at Little Creek, but because I believe you've grown beyond that incident. Your performance during Tidewater Shield demonstrated professional competence and genuine cultural change. That's what this task force needs. She paused, making eye contact with each of them. However, understand that my recommendation came with accountability. If you revert to old behaviors, if you demonstrate bias or unprofessionalism, if you fail to uphold the standards this task force requires, I will personally ensure you're removed. I gave you a second chance. I won't give you a third. Questions? Kevin Park raised his hand. Ma'am, what's the operational focus for the task force? Counter-terrorism operations in maritime environments, primarily focusing on threats that require both naval insertion and ground assault capabilities. Think high-value target capture on vessels, coastal facility raids, riverine interdiction operations. Missions where traditional single-service approaches are less effective than integrated joint operations. She advanced to the next slide, showing a map of global hotspots. We'll be deploying to multiple theaters over the next 18 months. Our first deployment is scheduled for 8 weeks from now, location classified, until final mission briefing. Between now and then, we'll be conducting intensive integration training to ensure Navy and Army elements can operate as a unified team. Brandon Cole spoke up. Ma'am, medical support structure? Excellent question. We have both Navy corpsmen and Army medics in the task force. You'll be working with Staff Sergeant Maria Santos. You might remember her from Little Creek. She was the corpsman who documented your comments at the dining facility. The team shifted uncomfortably. Santos had been a witness to their worst behavior. Alana's expression didn't change. Staff Sergeant Santos is an exceptional medical professional with extensive combat experience. She's aware of the incident at Little Creek and your subsequent growth. Like me, she's willing to work with you based on your demonstrated improvement. I suggest you take that as the gift it is and prove her trust isn't misplaced. Derek Chun raised his hand tentatively. Ma'am, how do we address the elephant in the room? The fact that we disrespected you 6 months ago and now we're working under your command? Elena appreciated the directness. Petty Officer Chun, here's how we address it. We don't. What happened at Little Creek is documented, addressed, and resolved. I'm not interested in dwelling on past mistakes when we have future missions to accomplish. You've apologized, you've changed your behavior, you've demonstrated growth. That's sufficient for me. She leaned against the desk. However, understand that trust is rebuilt through action, not words. Every decision you make, every interaction you have, every moment of stress or difficulty, those are opportunities to demonstrate that your growth was genuine. I'm giving you those opportunities. What you do with them is up to you. Marcus Dalton stood. Ma'am, on behalf of my team, I want to say that we understand the significance of your recommendation and the responsibility that comes with it. We won't let you down. See that you don't, Lieutenant Commander. Now let's discuss the training schedule. The following 8 weeks were the most intensive training period any of them had experienced. The Joint Task Force conducted daily combined operations, training maritime insertions, followed by building assaults. Riverine navigation combined with ground combat. Underwater demolition integrated with land-based explosives work. They trained in shipboarding, helicopter operations, small boat handling, urban warfare, close-quarters combat, advanced medical procedures, and a dozen other specialized skills. But more than the tactical training, they learned to work together across service cultures. They learned that Army Special Forces brought capabilities SEALs didn't have: language skills, cultural expertise, advanced ground combat techniques, and experience operating in denied territories for extended periods. The SEALs brought maritime expertise, underwater capabilities, and specialized training in maritime interdiction that complemented the Army's ground combat proficiency. And they learned to trust Elena Cross as an operational leader. She planned missions with meticulous attention to detail, anticipated problems before they emerged, and made tactical decisions that leveraged each element's strengths while compensating for their weaknesses. Her experience in joint operations was evident in every briefing, every training evolution, every after-action review. One evening during the 7th week of training, the team was conducting maintenance on their equipment when Staff Sergeant Maria Santos approached. The corpsman they remembered from Little Creek had changed. She now wore an Army uniform, having transferred services to join the Joint Task Force medical element. Gentlemen, she said, her voice professionally neutral, I'm conducting medical assessments for all task force personnel before deployment. I need to see each of you individually over the next 2 days. Lieutenant Commander Dalton, can you start now? Dalton followed her to the medical facility, a well-equipped space with modern trauma equipment and supplies. Santos gestured to an exam table. Routine physical assessment. Any injuries, illnesses, or conditions I should know about? Negative, Staff Sergeant. She conducted the examination with professional efficiency, vital signs, range of motion tests, cardiovascular assessment, the standard pre-deployment medical screening. When she finished, she made notes on her tablet, then looked up at Dalton directly. I'm going to say something off the record, Lieutenant Commander. What I witnessed at Little Creek 6 months ago was some of the most unprofessional behavior I've seen in 12 years of military service. I seriously considered filing a formal complaint that would have ended your career. Dalton met her gaze. You would have been justified in doing so. The only reason I didn't was because Chief Cross asked me not to. She said she wanted to handle it through command channels and use it as a learning opportunity rather than a career-ending punishment. I disagreed with her decision at the time. I thought you all deserved to be drummed out. That would have been fair. Santos set down her tablet. But I've watched you over the past 8 weeks. I've seen how you interact with Chief Cross, how you treat the Army personnel, how you've worked to integrate rather than dominate. You're different operators than you. We're at Little Creek. That's the only reason I agreed to be part of this task force medical team, because Chief Cross convinced me you were capable of genuine growth. Staff Sergeant, I appreciate your honesty. And I want you to know that we understand the gift Chief Cross gave us. We're committed to honoring that gift through our actions. Santos studied him. I'm going to hold you to that, Lieutenant Commander. And if I see even a hint of the behavior you demonstrated at Little Creek, I won't give you the same grace Chief Cross did. I'll document it, report it, and push for your removal. Are we clear? Crystal clear, Staff Sergeant. And I wouldn't expect anything less. She nodded. Good. Then we understand each other. You're medically cleared for deployment. Send in Petty Officer Chun next. As Dalton left the medical facility, he found his team waiting outside. They'd clearly been discussing something, and they looked up as he emerged. Everything okay, sir? Kevin Park asked. Everything's fine. Santos is thorough, professional, and has every right to be skeptical of us. But she's willing to work with us based on our demonstrated improvement. That's all we can ask. He looked at his team. We've been given something rare, a genuine second chance from people who had every reason to write us off completely. Don't waste it. Tyler Brooks spoke up. Sir, I've been thinking about something Chief Cross said during that first briefing. About trust being rebuilt through action, not words. I want to make sure I'm taking the right actions. What does that look like in practice? Dalton considered the question. It looks like treating every operator with respect regardless of gender or service. It looks like speaking up when you hear unprofessional comments from anyone, not just our team. It looks like actively seeking opportunities to learn from people whose backgrounds are different from yours. It looks like making Chief Cross's job easier, not harder. And it looks like understanding that we're not just representing ourselves, we're representing the possibility that people can change. That's a lot of pressure. James Mitchell observed. It is, Dalton agreed. But it's pressure we earned. So we carry it, and we prove that the weight was worth bearing. The conversation was interrupted by Elena Cross emerging from the operations building. She was carrying a secure case and walking with purpose. When she spotted them, she changed direction slightly to intercept. Lieutenant Commander, I need your team in the briefing room in 30 minutes. We just received a warning order for potential deployment acceleration. The operation we were planning for next month might be moved up to next week. I need to brief the preliminary intelligence and start mission planning. We'll be there, ma'am. She started to walk away, then paused and turned back. Dalton, a question. Why did you accept this assignment? You could have declined. It would have been understandable given the awkward history. Dalton didn't hesitate. Because working with you makes me a better operator, ma'am. You see things I miss. You approach problems from angles I wouldn't consider. And you hold people to standards that elevate everyone around you. I'd be a fool to turn down the opportunity to learn from that expertise. Elena studied him for a moment, and something in her expression softened almost imperceptibly. That's a good answer, Lieutenant Commander. Let's see if your actions match your words over the next 18 months. They will, ma'am. You have my word. She nodded once and walked away, leaving Dalton and his team standing in the gathering dusk. Around them, the Joint Task Force compound buzzed with activity as personnel from both services prepared equipment, conducted training, and built the relationships that would be essential when bullets started flying in real operations. The journey from that morning at Little Creek to this moment had been long, painful, and humbling. But standing here now, part of something innovative and important, working alongside operators who'd given them a second chance they didn't deserve, Marcus Dalton felt something he hadn't felt in months. Not pride, exactly. Not yet. He hadn't earned that, but purpose, direction, the possibility of redemption, not through words or apologies, but through sustained excellence and the daily choice to be better than he'd been. And sometimes, that possibility is enough to build on. The sun was setting over Norfolk, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Inside the compound, Elena Cross was preparing a briefing that would send them into danger. And SEAL Team 5 was ready to follow her there, not because they had to, but because they'd finally learned what she'd known all along. That excellence has no gender, no service branch, no appearance. It only has commitment, capability, and character. And those are the qualities that separate warriors from everyone else. 14 months later, the Joint Maritime Task Force Poseidon had completed 6 successful deployments across 3 continents. They'd conducted operations that neither service could have accomplished, alone maritime interdictions that transitioned seamlessly into ground assaults, riverine infiltrations that led to complex urban raids, and coastal facility strikes that required both underwater approach and building clearance expertise. The task force had become a proof of concept, demonstrating that genuine inter-service integration could produce operational capabilities greater than the sum of their parts. Marcus Dalton stood on the deck of the USS Bataan, watching the Mediterranean coastline disappear into the pre-dawn darkness. Their latest operation had just concluded, a high-value target capture that had required infiltration by submarine. A 3-kilometer underwater approach, shipboarding, target detention, and emergency extraction under hostile fire. 0 friendly casualties, mission accomplished. Intelligence materials secured. Elena Cross emerged from below deck, moving with the easy confidence of someone whose body had fully healed and whose skills had been honed through repeated operational success. She'd been promoted to Chief Warrant Officer 2 months ago, a recognition of her exceptional leadership and the task force's operational achievements. "Lieutenant Commander," she said, joining him at the rail, "Captain Torres wants to see us both for the after-action hot wash in 20 minutes. "Understood, ma'am." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun begin to rise over the water. 14 months of working together had created a professional relationship built on mutual respect, tactical trust, and the shared experience of difficult operations executed successfully. "Can I ask you something personal, ma'am?" Dalton said. "You can ask. I'll decide whether to answer. Do you ever think about that morning at Little Creek? About how badly we failed you?" Elena was quiet for a long moment. "Honestly? Not often anymore. In the beginning, yes, it was fresh, it hurt, and I had to consciously work to separate the incident from my assessment of your professional capabilities. But over these 14 months, you and your team have demonstrated who you actually are rather than who you were in that moment. You've been professional, competent, and genuinely committed to the joint mission." She turned to face him. "Here's what I've learned, Lieutenant Commander. People aren't defined by their worst moment unless they choose to be. You could have stayed the operator who made those comments at Little Creek, bitter about the consequences, resistant to change, going through the motions of professional development without genuine growth. Instead, you chose to actually transform. That choice matters more than the initial failure. That's generous, ma'am. It's not generosity. It's pragmatism. I need operators I can trust in life or death situations. Over 14 months and 6 deployments, you've proven you're that operator. What happened at Little Creek is data, but it's old data. The recent data is more relevant. Dalton looked out at the water. My daughter starts Navy, our OTC, next fall. She wants to be a SEAL. When I told her about what happened with you, she asked me if I'd support her if she pursued that path. I told her I would, and I meant it. But I also told her that because of my mistakes, I have a responsibility to make the SEAL community better for her generation. Elena's eyebrows rose. You told your daughter about Little Creek? I did. I thought about hiding it, but that felt like taking the easy way out. She deserved to know that her father had failed badly and what I was doing to be better. She said. He paused, emotion evident in his voice. She said she was proud of me for owning my mistakes and doing the work to change. That meant more than any professional commendation I've received. That took courage, Elena said quietly, both telling her and hearing her response. Your daughter is lucky to have a father who can model accountability. She's also lucky that there are operators like you who've opened doors that were closed when I came through. When she goes through SEAL training, if she makes it, she faced challenges I never had to face. But because of operators like you, she also have proof that women can succeed in special operations. That matters. A voice called from the hatch. Chief Cross, Lieutenant Commander Dalton, Captain Torres is ready for you. The after-action review was thorough and professional. Captain Michael Torres, the task force commander, walked through every phase of the operation, identifying successes and areas for improvement. The SEAL element's underwater approach had been flawless. The Army element's shipboarding execution had been textbook. The joint coordination during the target detention had been seamless. The emergency extraction under fire had been handled with the kind of calm professionalism that prevented casualties. Gentlemen, ladies, Torres concluded, looking around at the assembled operators from both services. This operation represents everything Joint Maritime Task Force Poseidon was designed to achieve. You combine Navy maritime expertise and Army ground combat proficiency to accomplish a mission that neither service could have done alone. You demonstrated trust, communication, and genuine integration under the most stressful conditions imaginable. He paused. This task force started as an experiment. Many people doubted it would work, doubted that Navy and Army cultures could truly integrate, doubted that we could overcome service rivalries and ego to function as one team. You've proven the doubters wrong. In 14 months, this task force has conducted 17 operations with a 100% mission success rate and 0 friendly fatalities. That's not luck. That's professionalism. After the briefing, as personnel dispersed to their various duties, Elena found herself approached by Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, the task force senior medic. Ma'am, got a minute? Of course, Maria. What's on your mind? Santos glanced around to ensure privacy. I wanted to apologize. Remember back at Little Creek when I told you that recommending SEAL Team 5 for the task force was a mistake? That they'd revert to their old behaviors and cause problems? I remember. I was wrong. Over these 14 months, I've watched them integrate, grow, and genuinely embrace the joint mission. Petty Officer Cole has become one of my best trauma medics. He's teachable, dedicated, and constantly pushing himself to learn more. Lieutenant Park has been mentoring junior personnel about professional conduct and unconscious bias. Even Senior Chief Washington, working at the training center, has been incorporating lessons from the Little Creek incident into his instruction. Santos shook her head. I genuinely didn't think people could change that fundamentally. I thought the Little Creek incident revealed who they really were, and that the apologies were just damage control. But I was wrong. They did the work. They became better operators and better people. You saw that potential in them when I didn't. Elena smiled. Maria, you weren't wrong to be skeptical. Skepticism was appropriate given their behavior. But you were willing to observe, assess, and revise your opinion based on new evidence. That's exactly what we need more of, people who make judgments based on current data rather than past assumptions. Still, I should have trusted your judgment from the beginning. No. You should have maintained appropriate skepticism while remaining open to the possibility of change. Which is exactly what you did. That's perfect, not flawed. An alarm sounded general quarters. The ship's 1 megacoulomb system crackled to life. All hands, prepare for emergency operational tasking. Task Force Poseidon Leadership Report to the Combat Information Center. Immediately. Elena and Santos exchanged glances and moved quickly through the ships. Passageways toward the CIC. Whatever was happening required immediate response, and the task force was apparently being tasked. In the CIC, Captain Torres was already receiving a briefing from the ship's intelligence officer. As Elena entered, he gestured her forward. Chief Cross, we've got a developing situation. American civilian vessel has been seized by pirates approximately 200 nautical miles from our current position. 12 Americans on board, unknown number of hostile actors. Vessel is heading toward territorial waters where we'll lose jurisdiction. CENTCOM wants Poseidon to execute an immediate interdiction and rescue operation. He pulled up a tactical display. Time-sensitive target. We need to hit them before they reach territorial waters in approximately 8 hours. Your team conducted shipboarding just yesterday. Are your personnel ready to go again? Elena assessed the situation quickly. Her operators were tired from the previous mission, but they were also still in operational rhythm. Their equipment was already configured for maritime operations, and they had fresh intelligence on effective tactics. Sir, we're ready. Give me 45 minutes for mission planning, and we can launch. You've got 30 minutes. This is time critical. Brief me before you launch. Elena gathered her key leaders, Marcus Dalton for the SEAL element, Captain Sarah Mitchell for the Army element, Santos for medical support, and her intelligence specialist. They spread a map across the planning table and began the rapid mission planning process that 14 months of operations had refined into an efficient system. SEAL element handles the approach and boarding, Elena said. Army element provides overwatch from helicopters and secures the hostages once we're on board. Medical team positioned for immediate trauma response. Intelligence suggests 6 to 8 hostile actors, likely armed with small arms and possibly RPGs. Dalton studied the vessel schematics. Bridge control is critical. If they barricade themselves with hostages, this becomes a siege situation we don't have time for. I recommend a simultaneous 2-point entry. SEAL element takes the bridge while Army fast ropes to the main deck and secures the hostage-holding area. Agreed, Elena said. Mitchell, your element ready for helicopter insertion? Captain Mitchell nodded. We've done it a dozen times. My team can be airborne in 15 minutes. They refined the plan, assigned responsibilities, established contingencies, and prepared for every scenario they could anticipate. When Elena briefed Captain Torres, he approved immediately. Execute. Bring those Americans home safely. The operation launched exactly 30 minutes after the initial alert. SEAL Team 5 conducted an underwater approach to the hijacked vessel using their combat rubber raiding craft, moving through darkness with the silent efficiency they'd perfected over dozens of operations. The Army element lifted off in helicopters, circling high above the target vessel. Waiting for the signal to begin their assault, Elena coordinated from the USS Batan's Combat Information Center, monitoring communications from both elements, tracking the tactical picture, and preparing to make real-time adjustments as the situation developed. SEAL element approaching target vessel. Dalton's voice came through the radio. Calm despite the dangerous circumstances. No sign of external security. Preparing to breach. The operation unfolded with the precision of a well-rehearsed dance. The SEAL element scaled the vessel's stern using magnetic climbing equipment, moving silently to the bridge. The Army element fast-roped onto the main deck simultaneously, their timing perfect. Both elements breached at exactly the same moment, overwhelming the pirates before they could organize resistance. Bridge secure, 3 hostile actors detained, Dalton reported. No casualties. Main deck secure, 5 hostile actors detained, 12 American hostages recovered, Mitchell added. All hostages appear physically unharmed. Medical team. Prepare to receive hostages for assessment, Santos called out. Already moving toward the flight deck where helicopters would deliver the rescued Americans within 45 minutes of the initial breach. All hostages were aboard the USS Bataan receiving medical attention. All hostile actors were detained and in custody. And both SEAL and Army elements had successfully extracted without casualties. It was a textbook operation, executed under time pressure with flawless coordination between services. As the sun rose fully above the Mediterranean, Elena stood in the CIC, exhausted but satisfied. Captain Torres approached with an expression that mixed pride and something else, concern, perhaps, or contemplation. Chief Cross, I just received word from SOCOM headquarters. They've been monitoring Poseidon's operations for 14 months, assessing whether the Joint Task Force model is viable for expansion. Based on our performance, they're recommending the establishment of 4 additional joint maritime task forces across different theaters. They want you to help design the organizational structure and training pipeline. Elena absorbed this information. Sir, that's significant expansion. Are they sure the model is ready for that scale? They're sure because you've proven it works. Poseidon wasn't just an experiment in tactics, it was an experiment in culture. You've demonstrated that Navy and Army personnel can genuinely integrate, that service rivalries can be overcome, and that joint operations can produce results superior to single-service approaches. That's what they want to replicate. What about Team 5, sir? The SEAL element that started this journey with significant cultural challenges? Torres smiled. Them especially. SOCOM wants experienced personnel who understand both the tactical and cultural aspects of joint operations. Lieutenant Commander Dalton and his team have become some of our most effective instructors for new personnel joining Poseidon. They know what doesn't work because they lived it. And they know what does work because they transformed themselves. He looked out at the Mediterranean, where the rescued hostages were being transferred to another vessel for transportation home. Chief Cross, 14 months ago you took a risk recommending personnel who demonstrated significant professional failures. Many people questioned that decision. Today, that decision looks like genius. You saw potential that others missed, and you created an environment where that potential could develop. That's exceptional leadership. Sir, I just gave them an opportunity. They did the work. That's what good leaders do. They identify potential, create opportunities, and hold people accountable for growth. You've done that consistently, not just with Team 5 but with every operator in this task force. That's why you're the right person to help expand this program. As the operational tempo slowed and personnel returned to routine duties, Marcus Dalton found Elena on the flight deck, watching helicopters conduct maintenance operations. Ma'am, I heard about the expansion plans. Congratulations, you've built something important. We've built something important, Elena corrected. This task force works because every operator committed to the joint mission. That includes you and your team, who had more obstacles to overcome than most. Dalton looked out at the water. Ma'am, can I tell you something I've never told anyone else? That morning at Little Creek, after we made those comments about you, I felt a small twinge of doubt. Something in my gut that suggested maybe we were wrong, maybe we were being unfair. But I ignored it because acknowledging doubt would have made me look weak in front of my team. And now? Now I understand that ignoring that doubt was the actual weakness. Real strength would have been admitting I didn't have all the information, questioning my assumptions, and showing respect regardless of my uncertainty. I failed that test at Little Creek. I've spent 14 months trying to pass it every day since. Elena was quiet for a moment. Lieutenant Commander, I'm going to share something with you. When Captain Hargrove first told me you'd been assigned to Poseidon, my immediate instinct was to decline the assignment. I didn't want to work with people who disrespected me, didn't want the daily reminder of that humiliation, didn't want the emotional labor of managing that awkward history. What changed your mind? Commander Bryant. He told me that the easy choice was to avoid you, but the right choice was to give you an opportunity to demonstrate growth. He said that if I truly believed people could change, I needed to act on that belief. So I did. And I'm glad I did, because you and your team have proven that transformation is possible when people are willing to do the difficult work. She turned to face him directly. Here's what I want you to understand, Dalton. You're not the same operator you were at Little Creek. None of your team are. You've grown, evolved, and become better versions of yourselves. That growth is permanent as long as you continue choosing it every day. Don't let one bad morning define you for the rest of your career. Let these 14 months, and hopefully many more, define you instead. Thank you, ma'am. That means more than you know. One more thing, Elena added. Your daughter who's starting ROTC. Tell her to reach out to me if she needs mentorship or advice during her journey. Women in special operations need to support each other. It's still a challenging path, and having someone who's walked it before can make a difference. Dalton's eyes glistened. I'll tell her, ma'am. She'd be honored. 2 weeks later, Joint Maritime Task Force Poseidon returned to Norfolk to a formal ceremony attended by senior leadership from both Navy and Army Special Operations Commands. Admiral Patricia Knowles, now the Deputy Commander of U.S. Special Operations Command, presented the task force with a Presidential Unit Citation for their exceptional operational record. In her remarks, Admiral Knowles highlighted not just the tactical successes, but the cultural achievement the task force represented. Ladies and gentlemen, 14 months ago, many people doubted this experiment would succeed. They questioned whether Navy and Army cultures could truly integrate, whether service rivalries could be overcome, whether personnel with difficult histories could work together effectively. Task Force Poseidon has answered those questions definitively. Not just through their operational success, but through their demonstration that people are capable of extraordinary growth when given opportunity, accountability, and support. She looked directly at Elena, then at SEAL Team 5 standing in formation. This task force includes personnel who made significant mistakes early in their relationship. Rather than allowing those mistakes to become permanent definitions, they chose to learn, grow, and transform. That choice, that ongoing commitment to being better, is what makes special operations special. Not just our tactical capabilities, but our commitment to excellence in all aspects of service, including how we treat each other. After the ceremony, as personnel mingled with family members and guests, a young woman in civilian clothes approached Marcus Dalton. She had her father's eyes and her own determined expression. "Dad," she said, "I wanted to meet Chief Cross. Is she here?" Dalton scanned the crowd and spotted Elena talking with Admiral Knowles. "She's over there. Come on, I'll introduce you." They approached during a break in the Admiral's conversation. "Ma'am, this is my daughter, Jennifer Dalton. She's starting Navy ROTC next fall at Penn State." Elena shook Jennifer's hand warmly. "It's nice to meet you, Jennifer. Your father tells me you're interested in special operations." "Yes, ma'am. I want to be a SEAL. I know it's going to be difficult, especially for women, but I'm committed to trying." "That's good. Commitment is the starting point. Everything else, the physical training, the mental toughness, the tactical skills, those can be developed if the commitment is there. Elena pulled out a business card. Here's my contact information. When you get to Penn State, reach out to me. I can connect you with other women who are pursuing or have completed special operations training. Having a support network makes a difference. Jennifer took the card like it was precious metal. Thank you, ma'am. I've read everything I could find about women in special operations. You're kind of a legend. Elena smiled. Legends are usually exaggerated. I'm just an operator who kept showing up, kept doing the work, and kept pushing through obstacles. That's what you'll need to do too. No shortcuts, no special treatment, just sustained effort over time. I understand, ma'am. And Dad told me what happened at Little Creek, how he and his team messed up with you. He said that you giving them a second chance taught him more about leadership than anything else in his career. That's the kind of leader I want to be someday. Elena glanced at Marcus, whose eyes were suspiciously bright, then back at Jennifer. Your father and his team did something rare. They took responsibility for their mistakes and did the genuine work of transformation. Not everyone is capable of that. The fact that he was willing to share that story with you, to model accountability even when it was uncomfortable, shows the kind of leader he's become. You're lucky to have him as an example. As Jennifer moved away to talk with other operators, Admiral Knowles returned. That was kind of you, Elena, mentoring the next generation. It's necessary, ma'am. Every female operator who succeeds makes the path a little easier for the next one. We're still pioneers in a lot of ways, still breaking down barriers that shouldn't exist. But eventually, if we keep doing the work, those barriers will disappear completely. They will, Knowles agreed. Because of operators like you who refuse to accept limitations, who keep proving that excellence has no gender, and who have the grace to help others even after being treated unfairly. That's leadership at the highest level. As the ceremony concluded and people began to depart, Elena found a quiet moment alone. She stood at the edge of the naval base, looking out at the water where ships moved through their eternal rhythms, where new operators trained for missions they couldn't yet imagine, where the future of joint special operations was being written one exercise, one operation, one transformed life at a time, 14 months ago. She'd stood in a parking lot at Little Creek, injured and insulted by people who judged her without knowledge. Today, she stood as the operations officer of a successful joint task force, surrounded by operators who'd learned to see capability instead of gender, performance instead of appearance, character instead of stereotypes. The journey from that parking lot to this moment hadn't been easy. But it had been worth it, not because of the recognition or the commendations, or even the operational successes. Though those were satisfying, it had been worth it because 7 operators, who'd made terrible mistakes, had been given a chance to become better. And they'd taken that chance and run with it. Because a task force that shouldn't have worked according to conventional wisdom had exceeded every expectation. Because the culture was changing, slowly, painfully, but genuinely changing. And because somewhere, young women like Jennifer Dalton were looking at what Elena had accomplished and thinking, I can do that too. That thought, that belief, that certainty that the future would be better than the past, because people were willing to do the hard work of change, that was worth every difficult moment. Every instance of disrespect, every time she'd had to prove herself all over again. The watch continued. The mission persisted. And warriors like Elena Cross kept showing up, kept performing, kept demonstrating that excellence needs no qualifier, no caveat, no asterisk. Just commitment, capability, and character. The rest, as they say, is just noise, and professionals have always known how to tune out noise and focus on the mission. That's what makes them professionals. That's what makes them warriors. And that's what ensures that the next generation, male and female, Navy and Army, SEL and Special Forces will stand on the shoulders of those who came before and reach heights that today seem impossible, because that's what warriors do. Make the impossible routine, one mission at a time, one transformed life at a time, 1 second chance at a time. The sun set over Norfolk Naval Base, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold, as beautiful and indifferent as justice itself. And in that fading light, Chief Warrant Officer Forelena Cross smiled, squared her shoulders, and walked toward whatever came next, because the watch never ends, and neither does the mission of making tomorrow better than today. That's the real operation, and it's one worth completing. Always. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.